A little girl walked barefoot through a freezing rainstorm at 2 in the morning, carrying a piece of a dead man's Harley Davidson wrapped in a dish towel, like it was the last heartbeat her father ever left behind. She found the most dangerous-looking man on that highway, and she asked him for help. What happened next will shake you to your core, because the men who answered that call weren't heroes. They were scarred, broken, battle-wounded outcasts the world had already thrown away. But when a child stands in the rain holding her dead father's last breath, monsters become something else entirely. Stay with this one all the way to the end. Drop a like right now and comment your city. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. The rain had been falling for 6 hours straight across Route 9 outside Calvary Flats, Arkansas, and it showed no sign of mercy. Cold, sharp, diagonal rain that turned the blacktop into a black mirror and made every passing headlight look like a drowning star. The kind of rain that didn't just get you wet. It got inside your bones and stayed there, reminding you that comfort was something other people got to have. Ammon Rook sat alone on a warped wooden bench outside May's Griddle, the last roadside diner still open on a highway that the interstate had murdered 15 years ago. His back was against the cinder block wall. His legs stretched out in front of him, crossed at the ankles, steel-toed boots dark with rainwater. A cigarette burned between two fingers of his left hand, the smoke curling up through his silver beard and disappearing into the storm like a secret nobody asked for. He was 57 years old. He looked 65. 3 tours overseas had carved lines into his face that no amount of sleep would ever smooth out, and Ammon Rook hadn't slept well since 2004 anyway. His knuckles were scarred. His left ear carried a faded notch from a piece of shrapnel he never got properly removed. His leather vest hung heavy with rain, the iron knuckles MC patch across the back barely visible beneath the water. A grinning skull gripping a crescent wrench in its teeth, stitched by hand decades ago by a woman who was now buried in a cemetery Ammon couldn't bring himself to visit. His Harley sat beside him like a patient dog. Black paint slick with road grime and cold rain, chrome catching the flicker of May's dying neon sign. Half the letters burned out, the survivors buzzing like trapped insects. The bike was a 1998 Road King. It had more miles on it than most commercial trucks, and every single one of those miles had a story Ammon would rather not tell. Inside the diner, the lights were yellow and tired. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, wiping the same spot she'd been wiping for 20 minutes, watching Ammon through the window the way people in small towns watch men like him, with a mixture of curiosity and the quiet, practiced fear that comes from knowing some people carry weather systems inside their chests that have nothing to do with the sky. Ammon didn't go inside. He never did. He sat in the rain because the rain didn't ask him questions. The highway was empty, no trucks, no cars. Just the hiss of water on asphalt and the occasional crack of thunder rolling across the flatlands like something heavy being dragged across a wooden floor. Ammon watched the darkness beyond the neon and thought about nothing, which was the closest thing to peace he'd been able to manufacture in the last 20 years. Then he saw her. At first he thought it was a dog, something small moving along the shoulder of the highway, hunched and shaking. But dogs don't wear sneakers. Dogs don't hold things against their chests with both arms, like they're carrying the last thing in the world that matters. She was maybe 8 years old. Thin. Brown hair matted flat against her skull by the rain. A t-shirt 3 sizes too big hanging off one shoulder, soaked through to translucent. No jacket, no umbrella. Barefoot except for one sneaker on her left foot. The right one was missing, and her bare foot splashed through the puddles on the gravel shoulder without hesitation, like she'd been walking long enough that pain had become background noise. She was carrying something wrapped in a dish towel, holding it against her chest the way a soldier holds a wounded man's head above water. Whatever was inside that towel, it was the most important thing in her universe. Ammon didn't move. Not yet. He watched her approach through the curtain of rain, his cigarette burning forgotten between his fingers. The girl didn't see him at first. She was focused on the diner. The light, the warmth, the promise of a dry place to stand. Her eyes were locked on May's front door like it was the finish line of a race she'd been running for hours. Then she saw the Harley. She stopped dead. Her whole body went rigid, and something shifted in her face, Something Ammon recognized immediately because he'd seen it in mirrors, in barracks, in hospital rooms, in the eyes of men waking up from nightmares they couldn't describe. Recognition. Not of the bike, of what the bike meant, of what it connected to. She stood there in the rain staring at the Harley like it was a door to a room she thought had been locked forever. Then she looked at Ammon. He expected fear. He expected her to bolt. He was a large man in a soaked leather vest covered in patches, sitting alone in the dark outside a closed diner on a dead highway at 2 a.m. He looked exactly like the kind of person parents told children to run from. But this girl didn't run. She walked straight toward him, rain streaming down her face, barefoot slapping against the wet concrete, and she stopped 3 feet away and held out the dish towel bundle with both hands like she was making an offering. "Can you make my dad's bike breathe again?" Her voice was small but steady. Not pleading, not crying. Steady the way only children who've learned to survive without help can be steady. The kind of calm that breaks your heart worse than screaming ever could. Ammon looked at the bundle, then at the girl, then at the empty highway behind her. "Where'd you come from?" "Home." "Where's home?" "Down there." She pointed into the darkness with her chin, keeping both hands on the towel. "Past the grain elevator." Ammon knew the area. That was almost 3 miles from here. 3 miles of unlit county road in freezing November rain. "You walked 3 miles in this." It wasn't a question. She didn't treat it like one. "My mom doesn't know I'm gone. She fell asleep on the couch after Mr. Slade left. She always falls asleep after he leaves because he makes her cry, and then she gets tired." Ammon's jaw tightened. The cigarette had gone out. He didn't relight it. "Who's Mr. Slade?" "He's the man who wants to buy my dad's motorcycle. He says it's not worth anything. He says it's junk." She paused, and for the first time her voice cracked. Just barely, like a hairline fracture in glass. "But it's not junk. It's my dad's." Ammon sat forward slowly, elbows on his knees, bringing himself closer to her eye level without standing up, because he knew from years of dealing with damaged people that making yourself taller was the fastest way to make someone small feel smaller. "What's in the towel?" She unwrapped it carefully, the way someone handles something that might fall apart if you breathe too hard. Inside was a rusted Harley air cleaner cover, old chrome pitted with corrosion, the surface rough as sandpaper. But even in the dim neon light, Ammon could see the engraving. Someone had hand-carved words into the metal years ago, and the letters were still there beneath the rust like a message buried under snow. "For Lottie, when the road gets quiet." Ammon read it twice. The second time something happened behind his eyes that he wouldn't have been able to explain if someone held a gun to his temple and demanded an answer. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't sympathy. It was something deeper and uglier and more dangerous, the kind of recognition that happens when one wounded thing sees itself reflected in another. "Your dad was a rider." "He was the best rider in the world," Lottie said, and the way she said it wasn't childish exaggeration. It was testimony, delivered with the gravity of someone who had already learned that the dead needed living witnesses to prove they'd existed. "What happened to him?" "He got sick, real sick, the hospital kind of sick." She looked down at the air cleaner in her hands. "He told Mom to keep the bike for me. He said one day I'd be big enough to ride it. He said the bike would wait for me." She looked up. "But Mr. Slade says it's broken. He says nobody can fix it. He's giving Mom $400 to take it away." Ammon didn't answer right away. He stared at the engraving. The letters were crude, done with a hand tool, probably a rotary grinder. Not professional work. The work of a man in a garage at midnight doing the only thing he could think of to leave something permanent for a daughter he knew he was leaving behind. The rain hammered the pavement around them. $400, Ammon said quietly. "Mom says we need it. For the electric bill. And for the thing they put on the house that means someone can take it." "Lien." "Yeah, that." Ammon stood up. He didn't make a decision. The decision made itself, the way a bone knows where to break, the way water knows which way to fall. Some things aren't choices. They're recognitions. And Ammon Rook recognized this moment the way a veteran recognizes the sound of incoming fire before the first round lands. He pulled his phone from his vest pocket and dialed a number. It rang 4 times before a rough voice answered, thick with sleep. "It's 2 in the goddamn morning, Ammon." "I know, Dutch." "Then this better involve blood or fire." It involves a kid. Silence on the other end. 3 full seconds of it. Then a different voice. The awake voice. The sharp voice. The voice that Dutch Rannick used when the world stopped being background noise and became something that needed handling. Where? May's Griddle, Route 9, bring Cutter and Felix, bring tools. What kind? All of them. Another pause. How bad? Ammon looked at Lottie standing in the rain, one sneaker on, holding a dead man's air cleaner against her chest like a shield. Bad enough. Dutch hung up without another word. Ammon walked to the diner door and pushed it open. The warmth hit him like walking into a memory. The woman behind the counter looked up with the expression of someone preparing to say we're closing, but Ammon spoke first. I need 2 coffees. 1 black, 1 with as much sugar as you've got, and whatever food you can put together fast. The woman looked past him to the girl standing outside in the rain. That child is soaking wet. I know. She's barefoot. I know that too. Is she yours? No, but she's somebody's. The woman's expression changed. Not softened. Changed. Something behind her eyes recalculated, and the fear that had been sitting there for 20 minutes dissolved into something harder and more useful. I've got towels in the back. And my granddaughter left some clothes here last week. Might fit. That would help? Ammon brought Lottie inside. She sat in a corner booth wrapped in a clean towel, the air cleaner cover resting on the table in front of her like a centerpiece. She ate a grilled cheese sandwich in 6 bites without talking, then drank half a glass of milk and stared at the steam rising from Ammon's coffee cup with the focused silence of a child who had learned that silence was safer than speaking. What's your last name, Lottie? Arlen. And your dad was Everett Arlen. She nodded. Ammon pulled out his phone again and typed a text message to a number he hadn't used in months. The response came back in 40 seconds. The name Everett Arlen wasn't in any MC database, not a club member, not affiliated, not a 1%er. Just a civilian who rode because riding was the only language that made sense to him. Ammon understood that. Most of the men he rode with hadn't joined the Iron Knuckles because they wanted to be outlaws. They joined because the world had already made them outlaws, by sending them to wars nobody wanted to remember, by handing them diagnoses nobody wanted to treat, by giving them discharge papers and then acting surprised when the men holding those papers couldn't figure out how to live in a world that hadn't missed them while they were gone. Your dad ever ride with a club? Lottie shook her head. He rode alone. He said the road was his friend, and the bike was his voice. Ammon looked at the engraving again. For Lottie, when the road gets quiet. The door opened at 2:47 a.m. Dutch Rannick came in first. 6'2", 240 pounds, gray ponytail soaked flat against the back of his neck, his face a roadmap of bad years and worse decisions. Behind him was Cutter Moyles, thin as a rail, fingers stained with decades of engine grease that no soap would ever fully remove. And behind Cutter was Felix Briggs, the youngest of the 3 at 41, carrying a metal toolbox in each hand like suitcases, his left eye still carrying the milky scar from a piece of windshield that had ended his military career and started his second life. They filled the doorway like storm clouds walking indoors. Every inch of them looked dangerous. Leather, patches, scars, boots leaving muddy prints on the linoleum. The woman behind the counter took a half step backward. Then Dutch saw Lottie. He stopped. His whole body changed. The hardness in his shoulders didn't disappear. It redirected, like a weapon being re-aimed. This the kid? Ammon nodded. Dutch walked to the booth, pulled out the opposite chair, and lowered himself into it like a man who'd learned long ago that his size scared people and had taught himself to move slowly because of it. He looked at the air cleaner on the table. Your daddy's bike? Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. I work for a living. A pause, the faintest crack of a smile. My name's Dutch. These 2 ugly bastards are Cutter and Felix. Felix raised a hand. Cutter just nodded once, already studying the air cleaner with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. That's original Harley-Davidson hardware, Cutter said. S&S Super E series. Probably late 90s. Somebody took care of this thing. My dad did. Lottie said it with a firmness that made all 3 men look at her. He cleaned every part every Saturday. He had a notebook. He wrote everything down. Cutter looked at Ammon. Something passed between them. The kind of silent communication that happens between men who've spent years trusting each other in situations where talking could get you killed. "Where's the bike now?" Dutch asked. "In our garage. Mom locked it after Mr. Slade came last time." "Why'd she lock it?" Lottie hesitated. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked uncertain, not scared, but navigating something she didn't fully understand. "Because things went missing. From the bike. After Mr. Slade visited the first time to look at it." The silence that hit the table was different from the silence before. This was heavier. This had edges. "Things went missing," Ammon repeated. "Dad's bike used to start. Mr. Slade came and looked at it. After that, it wouldn't start anymore. Mom said maybe it just broke, but Dad always said that bike would run forever if you treated it right." Cutter set the air cleaner down gently on the table. His stained fingers were absolutely still. "Someone sabotaged a dead man's motorcycle," he said quietly, "to buy it for scrap from his widow." Nobody spoke. The rain hit the windows harder. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered. Somewhere on Route 9, a truck passed without stopping, its headlights sweeping across the diner wall like a searchlight before disappearing into the dark. Ammon stood up. "Finish your milk, Lottie. We're going to your house." "My mom's going to be mad." "Your mom's going to be a lot of things before this night's over. Mad's probably the least of them." He left 2 20s on the table for the woman behind the counter. She didn't pick them up. She just watched the 4 men and 1 small girl walk out into the rain, and she reached for the phone on the wall. Not to call the police, but to call her sister, because something was happening on Route 9 tonight, and she wanted someone to know. The ride to the Arlen house took 11 minutes. Ammon drove the tow truck that Dutch kept parked behind Maze for emergencies, a battered 2003 Ford F55, with a cracked windshield and a cab that smelled of cold coffee, hydraulic fluid, and the ghost of 10,000 cigarettes smoked on long drives to nowhere. Lottie sat in the passenger seat with her feet tucked under her, the air cleaner back in her lap, watching the rain streak across the windshield with the blank patience of someone who had nowhere better to be. Dutch, Cutter, and Felix followed on their bikes. 3 headlights cutting through the storm single file. The sound of their engines was low and steady, not the aggressive roar of men trying to announce themselves, but the patient growl of something moving with purpose through hostile terrain. The Arlen house sat at the end of Hadley Road, a narrow county lane with no streetlights and no neighbors close enough to notice anything. It was a single-story ranch with gray vinyl siding that had probably been white once. The porch light was on, a single yellow bulb that made the rain look like falling amber. The yard was more mud than grass. A chain-link fence around the property leaned in 3 different directions, held upright more by habit than by hardware. The garage was detached, sitting 20 feet from the house, its door padlocked. And parked in the driveway, engine still ticking, was a black Lincoln Town car with dealer plates. Ammon's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's Mr. Slade's car," Lottie said. It was nearly 3:30 in the morning. No legitimate dealer visits a widow's house at 3:30 in the morning. Ammon parked the truck. He told Lottie to stay inside. She didn't argue. Another sign of a child who had learned that when adults use that particular tone, you listen. Dutch pulled up beside the truck and killed his engine. Cutter and Felix flanked the driveway. Nobody spoke. They communicated in gestures, the kind of tactical shorthand that gets drilled into you in places where hand signals are the difference between going home and going home in a bag. The front door of the Arlen house was open 3 inches. Through the gap, Ammon could hear a voice. Male, smooth, patient. The way predators are patient, not because they're calm, but because they already believe the outcome is decided. "Sign it tonight, Marla. Tomorrow the county files, and after that you won't even have the option. 400's better than nothing. You know that." Then a second voice. Female. Exhausted. The voice of someone who'd been standing in front of an avalanche for months and had finally run out of reasons to keep standing. "I told Everett I'd keep it for Lottie." "Everett's gone, sweetheart. Promises don't pay bills." Ammon knocked on the door. Not hard, not soft, The knock of a man who expects the door to open and is prepared for what happens if it doesn't. Silence inside the house. Then the door swung open, and Ammon Rook found himself looking at two people. The first was Marla Arlen, mid-30s, thin in the way people get thin when they stop eating because food costs money they don't have. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back in a knot that had been retied so many times it had become a permanent fixture. She wore a man's flannel shirt that was too big for her, probably Everett's, and her hands were shaking. The second was Vernon Slade. He was exactly what Ammon expected. Mid-50s, well-fed, tan that came from a salon, not a highway. Button-down shirt under a wool overcoat, no wrinkles. Shoes that had never touched mud until tonight. He was holding a clipboard with paperwork attached, and his smile was the kind of smile that costs exactly as much as the product it's selling. That smile faltered when he saw Ammon. It died completely when he saw Dutch, Cutter, and Felix standing in the rain behind him. "Who are you?" Vernon asked. "Friends of the family," Ammon said. "I wasn't aware Marla had friends like you." "She didn't. She does now." Marla looked past Ammon into the rain. Her eyes found the bikes, the vests, the patches. Her face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, fear, and something that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Mommy?" Lottie's voice came from behind Ammon. She'd gotten out of the truck despite being told to stay. She stood on the bottom porch step, rain running down her face, the dish towel bundle pressed against her chest. Marla's knees almost buckled. "Lottie, what? Where were you?" "I went to find someone who could fix Daddy's bike." "You went out in this? In the middle of the night? How did you—" "Lottie, do you have any idea how—" "I walked to the diner on the highway. I found him." She pointed at Ammon. "He's going to help." Vernon Slade shifted his weight. The clipboard rotated in his hands. "Marla, this isn't the time for—" "Mr. Slade!" Ammon's voice cut the air like a blade through wet paper. Not loud, not aggressive, just final. "What brings a motorcycle dealer to a widow's kitchen at 3:30 in the morning?" Vernon's jaw worked sideways. "That's between me and Mrs. Arlen." "It was. Now it's between you and all of us." Ammon stepped past Vernon without touching him and walked into the living room. It was small, a couch with a blanket and pillow on it. Marla's bed, apparently. A kitchen visible through a doorway. No pictures on the walls except one. A framed photo of a man in his early 40s sitting on a dark blue Harley Davidson, grinning at the camera with the careless joy of someone who didn't know what was coming. Beside him, on the gas tank, sat a little girl maybe 4 years old, wearing an oversized helmet that covered half her face. Everett and Lottie. Before the diagnosis. Before the bills. Before Vernon Slade. Ammon looked at the photo for a long time. "Where's the garage key, Marla?" She stared at him. "I don't— Who are you?" "My name is Ammon Rook. These men behind me are my brothers. Your daughter walked 3 miles through a rainstorm tonight because she believes someone can save her father's motorcycle. I'd like to see if she's right." Marla looked at Vernon, then at Ammon, then at the 3 men filling her front door, water pooling beneath their boots on her linoleum floor. "The key's on the hook by the back door," she whispered. Vernon stepped forward. "Marla, I need to advise you against—" "Mr. Slade," Dutch's voice came from the doorway, deep enough to vibrate the glass in the windows. The lady gave the man a key. "Whatever you're advising can wait until business hours." Vernon looked at Dutch the way a small dog looks at a highway, measuring the distance, calculating the risk, deciding whether forward or backward is more likely to keep him alive. He chose backward. "I'll be back in the morning. We can finish this then." "Looking forward to it," Ammon said. Vernon left. His Lincoln town car backed out of the driveway, tires spinning once in the mud before finding pavement. The headlights swept across the house and disappeared down Hadley Road. The moment the engine sound faded, Marla collapsed onto the couch. "I don't know who you people are. I don't know why you're here. My daughter just walked through a rainstorm to find a stranger, and now there are motorcycle gang members in my living room, and I don't even have enough coffee for—" "We brought coffee," Felix said, setting a thermos on the kitchen counter. "And we're not a gang," Cutter added. "We're a club." There's a difference. The difference being what, exactly? Gangs take things. Clubs fix them. Marla stared at Cutter for a long moment. Then she looked at Ammon, who was already walking toward the back door with the garage key in his hand. Why are you doing this? Ammon stopped. He didn't turn around. Because your husband left a message on that air cleaner that says the road gets quiet. And in my experience, when the road gets quiet, that's when the wrong people show up. Slade's already here. We're just late. He opened the back door and walked into the rain. The garage was cold. Concrete floor. Bare bulb overhead. The smell hit Ammon before his eyes adjusted. Oil, rubber, metal, and something fainter underneath. WD-40 and hand soap. The smell of a man who worked on machines and then washed his hands before going inside to hold his daughter. The Harley sat in the center of the garage under a canvas tarp. A 1997 Heritage Softail, dark blue under a layer of dust and neglect. Amon pulled the tarp off slowly, the way you pull a sheet off a body in a morgue, with respect and with the understanding that what's underneath changes everything. Even under the dust, the bike was beautiful. Everett Arlen had taken care of this machine the way some men take care of nothing else in their lives, with obsessive, wordless devotion. The chrome was oxidized but intact. The leather saddlebags were cracked but stitched. The paint, beneath the grime, was deep metallic blue with a single pinstripe in silver. But something was wrong. Ammon saw it immediately. The carburetor was wrong. Not just old or worn, wrong. It was a cheap aftermarket replacement, bolted on with hardware that didn't match the original mounting. The air intake was missing components. The fuel line had been disconnected and reconnected improperly. This wasn't neglect. This was surgery performed by someone who wanted the patient to die. Cutter knelt beside the engine and ran his fingers across the bolt heads. His face went tight. Fresh tool marks. Someone used a socket wrench on this within the last 3 weeks. These bolts aren't original. And this carburetor, he pulled a penlight from his vest and shone it into the engine compartment. This is a $40 junk carb from a parts catalog. The original S&S was worth $500 minimum. Stolen, Dutch said. Swapped. Somebody pulled the original and dropped this garbage in its place. Same with the ignition module. Look. He pointed. Aftermarket replacement. Cheap. Improperly grounded. This bike will never start with this setup. It's designed to fail. Ammon looked at the workbench along the far wall. Tools hung on a pegboard in perfect order. Every wrench, every socket, every screwdriver in its marked position. Everett Arlen's tools. The tools of a man who believed in systems, in order, in the certainty that if you take care of things, they take care of you. Except someone had used those systems against him, against his family. On the workbench, half buried under rags and old newspapers, Ammon found a spiral notebook. The cover was oil-stained. The pages inside were filled with Everett Arlen's handwriting, meticulous, careful entries documenting every repair, every oil change, every adjustment made to the Heritage Softail over 2 decades of ownership. Dates, mileage, parts used, torque specifications, the private language of a man talking to his machine. Ammon opened the notebook to the last entry. It was dated 11 months ago, 3 weeks before Everett Arlen died. Full service complete, bike running clean, carburetor rebuilt with original S&S components, serial number 4471-SS-97, all original factory parts confirmed. Lottie sat on the tank today while I tuned the idle. She said it sounds like a dragon sleeping. She's not wrong. Ammon set the notebook down and looked at Cutter. The serial number on that junk carburetor. Read it to me. Cutter leaned in with his penlight. No serial, generic, Chinese aftermarket, no markings at all. And the original, serial 4471-SS-97, is gone. Gone. Taken. And replaced with this. Cutter stood up. His face was the color of old concrete. Whoever did this knew exactly what to pull and exactly what to replace it with. This wasn't a smash and grab. This was a professional devaluation. Kill the bike's heart, swap in a corpse, and tell the widow it was always dead. Dutch was leaning against the garage door frame, arms crossed, rain dripping off his ponytail onto the concrete floor. Vernon Slade appraised this bike. Correct? Vernon Slade had access to this garage. Correct. And now Vernon Slade is offering $400 for a motorcycle that, with its original components intact, is worth $12,000 to $15,000, Cutter said. At least. With that provenance, with original S&S internals and a documented service history this clean, could push 20, maybe more to the right buyer. The silence in the garage was thick enough to cut. Ammon picked up the notebook and walked back to the house. Marla was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, watching Lottie sleep on the couch under a dry blanket. The girl's hand was still resting on the dish towel bundle. Even in sleep, she wouldn't let go. Marla, when Vernon came to appraise the bike, did he come alone? The first time, yes. He was in the garage for about an hour. He said he needed to inspect everything thoroughly. Was anyone with him? Did you watch? No, he told me to stay inside. He said insurance required a private inspection. Insurance? That's what he said. Ammon set the notebook on the table. He opened it to the last page and slid it toward her. Your husband documented every part on that motorcycle. Serial numbers, dates, conditions. The carburetor he rebuilt with his own hands has a serial number, sorcery 4471-SS-97. That carburetor is no longer on the bike. It's been replaced with a $40 piece of junk that has no markings at all. Marla's face didn't change at first. Then it did. Slowly, the way a crack spreads through ice. Not breaking, fracturing. You're saying he stole from us? I'm saying parts disappeared from your husband's motorcycle after Vernon Slade had unsupervised access to your garage. And now he's offering you $400 for a bike that's worth $20,000 intact. Marla's hand found the edge of the table and gripped it. He came to my house at 2 a.m, she said, last week, and tonight. He said the offer expires tomorrow because the county's filing paperwork on the house. He said if I didn't sign tonight. She stopped. Her eyes moved to the couch where Lottie slept. He said if I didn't sign, they'd take the house and the bike. Ammon sat down across from her. The house is a separate issue. We'll deal with that. But the bike? Marla, the bike is not junk. It was never junk. Somebody made it look like junk so they could take it from you for nothing. Marla's jaw tightened. Her knuckles went white on the table edge. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it was something Ammon had been waiting to hear since the moment he'd walked into this house. Anger. That bike is all Lottie has left of her father. I know. He promised her. He promised her. I know. So what happens now? Ammon looked toward the garage where Dutch and Cutter and Felix were already setting up work lights and unpacking toolkits, the sound of metal on metal cutting through the rain like a heartbeat restarting. Now we find out exactly what Vernon Slade took, and then we put it all back. At that moment, Cutter's voice cut through the rain from the garage, sharp and urgent enough that Ammon was on his feet before the second word landed. Ammon, get in here, now! He was in the garage in 4 seconds. Cutter was kneeling beside the workbench, his penlight aimed at the floor beneath it, his face showing an expression Ammon had only seen once before, the night they'd found evidence that changed everything about a case they thought they understood. I moved the bench to check the wall outlets, Cutter said. Look what was underneath. Wrapped in an oily shop rag, shoved into the narrow gap between the workbench legs and the concrete floor, was a carburetor. Chrome. Heavy. Original S&S Super E series hardware, with factory stamping still visible under a thin film of oil. Ammon knelt down and turned it over in his hands. On the underside, written in black marker on a small white sticker, were 2 things that made the blood drain from his face. A serial number, 4471-SS-97. And below it, in different handwriting, neat, precise, commercial. VS Automotive, inventory number 0217. Vernon Slade hadn't just stolen Everett Arlen's carburetor. He'd tagged it with his own inventory code, and then left it behind in the dead man's garage like a signature at a crime scene. Nobody touched the carburetor for 11 seconds. Ammon counted them the way he used to count seconds between mortar rounds. Not because counting helped, but because counting meant you were still alive to count. 11 seconds of silence broken only by the rain hammering the garage roof and the faint electrical hum of the work lights Cutter had clamped to the overhead rafters. Then Dutch spoke. He tagged it. Yeah. With his own inventory code. Yeah. And left it here. Ammon turned the carburetor over one more time, the shop rag falling away like dead skin. The sticker was clean, white, recent. The handwriting on it was careful. The handwriting of a man who labels things because he intends to come back for them. He wasn't done, Ammon said. He pulled the original, swapped in the junk, and stashed the good one under the bench for later retrieval. He probably planned to come back during the next visit, after Marla signed the papers. Once the bike belonged to him, he'd have every right to walk into this garage and collect what he hid. Cutter stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans, even though they were already clean. A nervous habit. Something he did when his brain was working faster than his mouth. That's not a con, that's a system. Meaning what? Meaning he's done this before. You don't develop a labeling protocol for a one-time theft. Inventory codes, pre-printed stickers, strategic component swaps. This is a process. This man has a pipeline. Felix was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, his scarred eye catching the overhead light at an angle that made it look like frosted glass. He hadn't spoken since they'd entered the garage. Now he pushed off the wall and walked to the workbench, pulling open drawers one by one with the methodical patience of a man who'd spent years searching vehicles at checkpoints in places he couldn't name without his throat tightening. "What are you looking for?" Dutch asked. "Business card. Receipt. Anything Slade left behind with printed information." Felix opened the third drawer and stopped. He reached inside and pulled out a glossy trifold brochure, the kind you find in motel lobbies and auto parts store windows. The cover showed a smiling man in a polo shirt standing in front of a showroom full of vintage motorcycles beneath a banner that read, "VS Automotive and Vintage Cycle Acquisitions. Fair deals for difficult times." "Fair deals for difficult times," Dutch read aloud. His voice could have stripped paint. Felix unfolded the brochure. Inside were 3 testimonials, names and photos of supposed clients praising Vernon Slade for helping them sell motorcycles during financial hardships. Beneath the testimonials, in small print, was a list of services: estate appraisals, divorce settlements, bankruptcy liquidations, repossession consulting. "He specializes in people who are drowning," Felix said. "Widows," Cutter added. "Divorces, bankruptcies, people who don't know what they have and don't have time to find out." Ammon took the brochure and studied the address. A commercial lot on Industrial Drive in Calvary Flats, 6 miles south. He folded it and put it in his vest pocket without a word. "We photograph everything," he said. "Every bolt, every serial number, every tool mark. Cutter, you document the carburetor swap, original versus replacement, condition, serial match to Everett's notebook. Felix, I want every page of that maintenance log photographed." "Dutch, already on it." Dutch had his phone out, the camera flash turning the garage into a strobe-lit crime scene. "But I want to say something, and nobody's going to like it." Ammon waited. "We're 4 guys standing in a dead man's garage at 4 in the morning with a stolen carburetor and a widow who hasn't slept in 2 days. We've got evidence. But evidence needs to go somewhere. And the somewhere is either the sheriff's office, which in a town this size is one guy with a badge and a cousin who probably sells auto parts, or it's a lawyer. And lawyers cost money that Marla Arlen doesn't have. We don't need a lawyer yet. Then what do we need? We need to know how many bikes Vernon Slade has gutted. Because if Cutter's right, if this is a system, then there are other families, other widows, other garages where original parts got swapped out in the dark." Dutch lowered his phone. "That's not our job, Ammon." The words landed in the garage like a dropped wrench. Cutter looked up from the engine. Felix stopped moving. Even the rain outside seemed to hesitate. "Excuse me?" Ammon said. "I said that's not our job. Our job tonight was to help a kid. We came. We're here. We found what we found. Now we hand it off. We're not investigators. We're not cops. We're 4 broken-down riders who fix motorcycles and mind our own business. Is that what you want to tell Lottie? That we mind our own business? Don't do that. Don't do what? Don't use the kid to win the argument. I love that little girl already, and I've known her for 90 minutes. But loving her doesn't make me a detective. It makes me a guy who showed up with wrenches. The silence between them was thick enough to taste. Old silence. The kind of silence that forms between men who've been through things together, that created bonds stronger than friendship, but more fragile than either of them would ever admit. Dutch and Ammon had ridden together for 14 years. They'd buried brothers together. They'd sat in hospital waiting rooms together while men they loved were being pieced back together by surgeons who wouldn't make eye contact. The foundation of their brotherhood wasn't agreement. It was the willingness to stand in the same room during a disagreement and not walk out. But Dutch's jaw was set, and Ammon's hands were fists. "You remember Collinsville?" Ammon asked quietly. Dutch flinched. It was small, a micro-movement of the muscles around his eyes. But Ammon saw it, and Dutch knew he saw it, and the temperature in the garage dropped 10 degrees. "Don't bring that up. You remember what we said after Collinsville, after we found out about the Denton family and decided it wasn't our problem? You remember what happened to the Denton kids after we rode away and minded our own business? That was different. It's always different, right up until it isn't." Dutch stared at Ammon for a long time. Rain dripped from his ponytail onto the concrete. His chest expanded with a breath he held for 4 full seconds before releasing it through his nose like steam from an engine. "God damn you, Ammon." "I know. If this goes sideways, it won't. You said that in Collinsville, too." Ammon didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that because Dutch was right, and they both knew it. Collinsville had gone sideways. People had gotten hurt. Not the people they were trying to protect. Other people. People they hadn't anticipated. People whose involvement turned a rescue into a reckoning that left scars on the Iron Knuckles MC that still hadn't fully healed. That was the thing about Ammon Rook that made him both the best and most dangerous man in the club. He couldn't leave a wound alone. Not on a motorcycle, not on a person, not on a situation. Once he saw the damage, his hands moved toward it with a compulsion that had nothing to do with heroism, and everything to do with the fact that leaving things broken made him feel like the broken thing was him. Cutter cleared his throat. "If it matters, and I'm not saying it should." I pulled up Slade's website on my phone. VS Automotive has a gallery page. 43 vintage motorcycles listed for sale. Most of them are estate acquisitions. He held up his phone. The screen showed rows of chrome and paint, Harleys, Indians, a couple of old Triumphs, all photographed in the same showroom, all listed with sanitized descriptions. Single-owner estate sale. Family-owned vintage bike. Acquired from private collection. 43 bikes, Cutter said. And every single listing says acquired from private collection. No names. No provenance details. No mention of how he got them. "Because the how is the crime," Felix said. Ammon took Cutter's phone and scrolled through the listings. His eyes stopped on the 7th one. A 1997 Heritage Softail, dark blue with silver pinstripe. The same year, the same model, the same color as Everett Arlen's motorcycle. "He's already listed it," Ammon said, "the bike that's still sitting in Marla's garage. He's already listed it for sale." Cutter leaned over and looked at the screen. The listing read, 1997 Heritage Softail Classic, full original components, documented service history, museum quality, $22,500. $22,500 for a motorcycle he was trying to buy for $400. Full original components, Dutch read. He's planning to reinstall the parts he stole before reselling it, buy it gutted for $400, put the originals back in, flip it for $22,500. That's a 5,000% profit margin on a dead man's legacy, Cutter finished. Nobody spoke for a moment. The work lights buzzed overhead. Outside, the rain had shifted from hammering to something steadier, the kind of rain that doesn't stop, that simply becomes part of the world you're living in. Ammon set the phone on the workbench. "We take this to Marla. All of it. The carburetor, the notebook, the listing, the brochure. She decides what happens next." "And if she decides she still needs the $400, Dutch asked. "Then we figure out another way to help her, but she makes the call, not us." They walked back to the house single file through the rain. Ammon carried the carburetor wrapped in a clean shop towel. Cutter carried the notebook. Felix had printed screenshots of the website listing from his phone at the convenience store printer they'd passed on the way in. Grainy, but readable. The kitchen light was still on. Marla was sitting in the same chair, but something about her posture had changed. She was straighter. Her hands were flat on the table instead of wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. She'd washed her face. Her hair was still pulled back, but tighter now. The flannel shirt was buttoned one button higher, small changes. But Ammon noticed. He always noticed. Lottie was still asleep on the couch, the air cleaner cover tucked under one arm like a stuffed animal. Her breathing was deep and even. The dreamless sleep of a child who had finally transferred the weight of her worry to someone else's shoulders. Ammon sat down across from Marla and placed each piece of evidence on the table, the way a man lays cards in a game that's already been won but not yet called. The carburetor. The notebook open to Everett's last entry. The printed listing from Slade's website. The brochure. He didn't explain. He laid them out and let them speak. Marla looked at each one. Her eyes moved from the carburetor's inventory sticker to the notebook's serial number to the website listing with its $22,000 price tag. Her face didn't crumble. It hardened. The way steel hardens. Through heat, through pressure, through a process that looks like destruction but is actually transformation. "He was in my garage for an hour," she said. "I made him iced tea. I thanked him for coming out so late. I apologized for the mess. You didn't know. I apologized. To the man who was robbing my dead husband's motorcycle. I apologized for the mess in the garage that Everett kept cleaner than our kitchen." Her voice cracked on the word kitchen, and for a moment Ammon thought she was going to cry. She didn't. She pressed her lips together until they were white and breathed through her nose until the moment passed. "How much?" she asked. "The bike, fully restored with original parts?" "Somewhere between 15 and 22,000. And he offered me 400. "Yes." "After he stole the parts that made it valuable." "Yes." Marla looked at the sleeping girl on the couch. She looked at her for a long time. Long enough for the coffee to stop steaming, long enough for Dutch to shift his weight from one foot to the other, long enough for the first gray light of dawn to appear in the kitchen window like a bruise forming on the horizon. "My husband was a quiet man," Marla said. "He didn't fight. He didn't argue. When the hospital bills came, he just worked more hours. When the diagnosis came, he just got quieter. The only time I ever saw Everett Arlen get angry, really angry, was when someone hurt something that couldn't fight back. A stray dog in the road. A kid being yelled at in a parking lot. A motorcycle left out in the rain." She looked at Ammon. "He would have liked you." Ammon didn't answer that. He couldn't. Something in his chest had tightened in a way he recognized, the precursor to an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He swallowed it, buried it, filed it in the same place where he kept the faces of men he'd served with who would never get the chance to sit in a warm kitchen and be told they would have been liked by a good man. "What do you want to do, Marla?" "I want to destroy him." The words came out flat. No drama, no tremor. The measured declaration of a woman who had been pushed past fear into the landscape beyond it. The place where decisions get made not because they're safe, but because they're the only ones left. "We can help with that," Dutch said from the doorway. And the way he said it, quiet, certain, committed, told Ammon that the argument in the garage was over. Dutch was in. Not because he'd changed his mind about the risks, because he'd looked at a sleeping child and a mother with steel in her voice and recognized the same thing Ammon had recognized hours ago on a wet bench outside a dying diner. Some fights find you, and when they do, the only real choice is how hard you swing. Cutter pulled a chair up to the table. "We need to work fast. Slade said he'd be back in the morning. That gives us 4, maybe 5 hours to restore the bike to original spec, document everything, and prepare for whatever he walks in with." "Can you restore it?" Marla asked. "The carburetor's here. The ignition module. I've got a matching replacement in my kit that'll work until we recover the original. Fuel lines, air intake, all fixable tonight." He paused. "But I need to check the rest of the bike. If he pulled 2 components, he might have pulled more. Some things I won't know until I'm inside the engine." "Then get inside the engine." Cutter nodded and headed for the garage. Felix followed, already pulling on a pair of latex gloves he'd produced from his vest pocket. The habit of a man who'd spent years being told that evidence is only evidence if you don't contaminate it. Dutch poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos. He set one in front of Marla. She picked it up and drank. This time, she actually tasted it. "It's good," she said. "Felix makes it. Nobody knows how. He won't tell us." The smallest flicker of something, not a smile, but the ghost of where a smile would live if the world hadn't been pressing its boot on her throat for the past 11 months. Outside, dawn was still an hour away, but the rain was thinning. The drumbeat on the roof had softened to a murmur. Through the kitchen window, the garage glowed with work lights, and Ammon could see Cutter's shadow moving across the walls. Methodical, focused, the silhouette of a man taking a broken thing apart so he could put it back together right. Ammon pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call." He stepped onto the back porch. The rain touched his face, and he let it. He dialed a number and waited. The voice that answered was female, tired but alert. The kind of alert that comes from years of sleeping with one ear open. "This is Ada." "It's Ammon." 3 seconds of silence. Then, "You've got nerve calling this number." "I know. I told you last time. I know what you told me, and I know why you told me. And I'm not calling about that." "Then what?" "I need your brain, not your forgiveness." Ada Kane didn't respond right away. Ammon could hear her breathing, slow, controlled, the breathing of someone deciding whether to hang up or lean in. Ada was a former forensic accountant who'd left the state comptroller's office after uncovering a procurement fraud that her supervisors had told her to forget. She hadn't forgotten. She'd been fired for not forgetting. And somewhere in the wreckage of her career and the dissolution of a marriage that couldn't survive her refusal to stop being right, she'd ended up doing freelance investigative work for people the system had spit out, including, briefly, the Iron Knuckles MC, during a dispute over property liens that had almost cost 3 members their homes. That engagement had ended badly. Not because Ada failed, she'd been brilliant, but because Ammon had made a decision during the case that put Ada's name on a document it shouldn't have been on, and the fallout had nearly cost her what was left of her professional reputation. He'd never apologized. Not because he wasn't sorry, but because he didn't believe in apologies that couldn't undo the damage they were apologizing for. He believed in action, in showing up differently the next time. The problem was that Ada had never given him a next time. Until now. "What's the situation?" she asked. He told her. All of it. The girl in the rain, the dead man's motorcycle, the swapped parts, the inventory code, the website listing. Vernon Slade and his brochure full of desperate people. Ada listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for 10 seconds. Inventory code on the stolen part. VS Automotive in inventory number 0217. Which means there are at least 216 other items in his system. That's what Cutter said. Your mechanic's smarter than he looks. He'd agree with that. Another pause. I can pull his business filings, cross-reference his acquisition records with probate court filings and estate sales in the Tri-County area. If he's buying from widows and bankruptcy cases, there'll be a paper trail. But it'll take time. How much time? 24 hours. Maybe less if his bookkeeping is as arrogant as his sticker system. We don't have 24 hours. He's coming back this morning. Then you don't need my research for the morning. You need it for what comes after. Let him come back. Show him what you found, and then call me when his face falls, because that's when the real work starts. Ammon almost smiled. Almost. Thank you, Ada. Don't thank me. Pay me. And Ammon. Yeah? Don't put my name on anything this time. She hung up. Ammon stood on the porch for a moment, rain collecting on his shoulders, and stared at the garage where his brothers were working. The sound of tools reached him through the wet air. The clink of sockets, the hiss of a compressed airline, the low murmur of men talking about torque specifications and fuel mixtures with the focused intimacy of surgeons in an operating room. He went back inside. Marla was standing at the kitchen window watching the garage. Her arms were crossed, the flannel shirt pulled tight around her shoulders. Without turning around, she spoke. Your friend. On the phone. Is she going to help? She's going to try. Is she good at what she does? She's the best. That's why she has no friends and no job. Marla turned around. Sounds familiar. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Then Lottie stirred on the couch. She didn't wake up, but she rolled over and the air cleaner cover slipped from under her arm and hit the floor with a soft, metallic thud. Marla walked to the couch, picked it up, and placed it back beside her daughter. Everett carved that inscription the night he got diagnosed, she said. He didn't tell me. I found him in the garage at midnight, sitting on the floor with a rotary tool and a flashlight. He'd been crying. I'd never seen him cry before, not even when his mother died. But that night he sat on the cold concrete and carved a message into a piece of motorcycle hardware because he didn't know how to say goodbye to his daughter with words. She placed her hand on Lottie's hair. The road gets quiet. That's what he said it meant. He said one day the noise would stop. The engines, the wind, the highway. And when it did, she'd need something to hold on to, something real, something that proved the noise had been there in the first place. Amin stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, and he didn't move, and he didn't speak, and he barely breathed because some moments are not for responding to. They're for witnessing. And the only proper response to a woman telling you how her husband said goodbye is to stand still and let the words land where they need to land. The hours between 4 and 7 moved with the slow heaviness of hospital time. That particular quality of waiting where every minute weighs more than it should and the clock seems to be running on something thicker than seconds. In the garage, Cutter and Felix worked with brutal precision. The original carburetor was cleaned, inspected, and reinstalled with the correct mounting hardware that Cutter had brought in his kit. Because Cutter traveled with a kit that could rebuild most Harley engines from the ground up, a fact that would surprise anyone who didn't know that his hands had been steadier than his mind for the last 20 years. And that working on engines was the only thing that kept the distance between those two facts from killing him. They found 3 more discrepancies. The ignition module, as Cutter had noted, had been swapped. A voltage regulator had been replaced with an incompatible unit. And the original handlebar grips, custom leather wraps with Everett's initials tooled into them, had been removed and replaced with cheap rubber substitutes. Each discovery was photographed. Each original part's absence was cross-referenced with Everett's notebook. The evidence grew on the workbench like a case file building itself. At 6:15, Felix made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. A sharp intake of breath through his teeth that made Cutter stop what he was doing and Dutch step closer. Under the seat pan, Felix said. He was lying on his back beneath the motorcycle, his phone's flashlight aimed upward. There's something taped to the underside of the frame. Cutter knelt down and looked. A small manila envelope, sealed with electrical tape, pressed flat against the bottom of the seat frame where no casual inspection would ever find it. Dutch brought it to the workbench. He cut the tape with a pocket knife and opened the envelope. Inside were 4 Polaroid photographs and a folded piece of paper. The photographs showed the Harley at different stages. One clearly taken years ago, the bike gleaming in full sunlight with every component intact. The others showed specific parts in close-up. The S and S carburetor, the ignition module, the voltage regulator, each photographed with the serial number visible. The folded paper was a handwritten note. Everett's handwriting. The same careful print from the maintenance notebook. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stop it myself. The man who came to appraise the bike is not honest. I saw him looking at parts the way men look at things they intend to take. I don't have proof yet, but I documented everything. The photos matched the serial log in my notebook. If anything goes missing, this is how you prove what was original. Please protect my girls. Amin read the note twice. The second time, his hands shook. Not from cold, not from anger. From the weight of standing in a dead man's garage holding a message that was meant for whoever came next. An understanding that Everett Arlen had known. He'd known Vernon Slade was a predator. He'd known the appraisal was a setup. And he'd known he wouldn't live long enough to fight it himself. So he'd left a weapon hidden inside the machine he loved most, and he'd trusted the future to deliver it to someone who would use it. Dutch read the note over Amin's shoulder. When he finished, he walked to the garage door and stood in the opening, looking out at the wet morning light just beginning to bleed across the eastern sky. He knew, Dutch said. He knew. And he couldn't stop it. He was dying. He didn't have time, so he did the only thing a man can do when he's running out of road. Ammon held up the note. He left a map for whoever came after him. And nobody came. For 11 months, nobody came. Someone came tonight. Dutch turned around. His eyes were wet. He wiped them with the back of his hand and didn't acknowledge it. And nobody else acknowledged it either, because there are things men do in garages at dawn that are between them and the concrete and the cold light and nothing else. Felix, Ammon said, add the photographs and the note to the evidence file. Handle them like glass. Already gloved. Cutter, how long until the bike runs? 30 minutes, maybe less. Carburetor's in. Ignition module for my spare kit is holding. I've got the fuel line reconnected and the regulator swapped. She'll run. Will she run clean? Cutter paused. He looked at the bike with the expression of a man who understands that machines have memories too. Not in circuits or processors, but in the wear patterns of their parts, in the oil that carries traces of every mile, in the vibrations that settle into metal over decades. She'll run the way Everett left her, clean, strong, like she's been waiting. At 7:40, the sky was the color of wet cement and the rain had stopped. Not gradually. It stopped like someone turning off a faucet. One moment the world was drowning. The next, silence. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every other sound. The drip of water from gutters. The tick of cooling engines. The distant bark of a dog somewhere down Hadley Road. Marla stood in the garage doorway holding a mug of coffee. Real coffee this time, from her own kitchen, made the way Everett used to make it, strong enough to stand a spoon in. She looked at the motorcycle. The Heritage Softail sat in the center of the garage under the work lights, cleaned and restored. Not showroom clean, work clean. The kind of clean that says someone who knew what they were doing spent hours on their knees giving a machine back its dignity. The chrome was polished, but not perfect. The blue paint still showed its age. The leather saddlebags still wore their cracks like scars that proved survival. But the heart was right. The carburetor was original. The ignition was functional. The fuel system was connected properly. The bike was whole again in the ways that mattered. Will it start? Marla asked. Only one way to find out, Cutter said. But not yet. Why not? Cutter looked at Ammon. Ammon looked at his phone. The time was 7:43 a.m. Because Vernon Slade said he'd be back in the morning, and when he walks into this garage, I want him to see exactly what we see. I want him to look at a motorcycle he gutted and see it staring back at him with all its teeth. Marla nodded slowly. And the note? Everett's note? He'll see that too, when the time is right. When is the time right? After he lies. People like Slade can't help themselves. They walk in with a story already built. Let him tell it. Let him commit to it. And then we take the floor out from under him. Marla took a sip of coffee. Her hand was steady now. Completely steady. At 8:12, Lottie woke up. She sat up on the couch, looked around the empty living room, and immediately clutched the air cleaner cover to her chest. Then she heard the voices from the garage and padded barefoot across the kitchen and out the back door. She stopped at the garage entrance. The bike was uncovered. The bikers were standing around it, dirty, exhausted, coffee cups in hand, tool belts hanging loose, faces gray with the particular fatigue that comes from working all night on something that matters. Lottie looked at the motorcycle, then at Ammon, then back at the motorcycle. You fixed it, she whispered. Cutter fixed it. I just held the flashlight. She walked to the bike slowly. She reached out and placed her small hand on the gas tank, right where the blue paint met the silver pinstripe. She closed her eyes. And in the silence of the garage, with 4 exhausted bikers and 1 fierce mother watching, Lottie Arlen did something that broke every man in the room in a way that would never fully heal. She leaned forward and pressed her ear against the gas tank, the way a child presses their ear against a sleeping parent's chest to check for a heartbeat. I can feel it, she said. It's still warm. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The morning light came through the garage door in a long, flat sheet of pale gold, and for 3 seconds the only sound in the world was a little girl listening to the ghost of an engine that hadn't run in 11 months. Then Dutch's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 4 seconds. His face changed the way a sky changes before a tornado. Not slowly, all at once. "That was my guy at the county clerk's office," he said. "Vernon Slade filed a purchase order for Marla's motorcycle yesterday afternoon, dated today. Pre-signed with a seller's signature that Marla never gave him. Marla's coffee cup hit the concrete floor and shattered." "He forged my signature?" "He filed the transfer before you agreed to sell. As far as the county is concerned, that bike already belongs to him." The garage went silent. Then headlights swept across the driveway. A black Lincoln Town car pulled in, tires crunching on wet gravel, engine purring with the obscene confidence of a machine that had never known a cold night or a rough road. Vernon Slade had arrived, and he had no idea what was waiting for him inside a dead man's garage. Vernon Slade stepped out of the Lincoln Town car the way a man steps into a room he believes he owns. Left foot first, polished shoe finding dry gravel with practiced precision. He buttoned his overcoat with one hand while the other held a leather portfolio against his hip, the kind of portfolio that holds contracts, not conversations. His face carried the expression of mild inconvenience, as though the entire morning was a formality between him and something that already belonged to him. He didn't see the motorcycles at first. 3 Harleys were parked along the far side of the driveway, lined up at identical angles, chrome catching the pale morning light like blades laid out on a table. Dutch's Road Glide, Cutter's stripped-down Dyna, Felix's Softail Slim, with the matte black tank, and no mirrors. Because Felix said mirrors made him look backward, and backward was a direction he'd quit traveling 6 years ago when he walked out of a VA hospital with a prescription for pills. He flushed down the toilet and a discharge summary he burned in a parking lot. Vernon saw the bikes. He stopped walking. His right hand tightened on the portfolio. His left hand, the one that had been adjusting his coat, froze mid-motion. Fingers suspended over the second button like a pianist forgetting the next note. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the smile returned. Not the same smile. A smaller one. A calculated one. The smile of a man recalculating odds and deciding they're still in his favor. He walked toward the garage. Alman was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, a cigarette burning between his index and middle finger, smoke rising past his silver beard into the cold morning air. He hadn't slept. None of them had. His eyes were red-rimmed and steady, the way eyes get when fatigue passes through exhaustion and comes out the other side as something sharper, a stripped-down clarity that doesn't have the energy for anything except the truth. "Morning, Mr. Slade." "Morning." Vernon's eyes moved past Ammon into the garage. He saw the work lights, the toolkits, the coffee cups, the evidence bags lined up on the workbench like specimens in a lab. His smile thinned but didn't disappear. "Looks like you've been busy." "Long night." "I can see that." Vernon adjusted his grip on the portfolio. "I'm here to finalize the paperwork with Mrs. Arlen. Is she available?" "She's inside. She'll be out when she's ready." "I prefer to speak with her directly." "I'm sure you would." The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. Vernon's eyes kept drifting toward the workbench, trying to read the evidence bags from 12 feet away. He couldn't. But the fact that they existed, labeled, organized, arranged with the kind of deliberate precision that suggests documentation rather than repair, was doing something to the muscles around his jaw. "May I come in?" Vernon asked. "Absolutely." Ammon stepped aside. Not back, aside. The difference mattered. Moving back is retreat. Moving aside is invitation, and invitations have doors that close behind you. Vernon walked into the garage. He saw the motorcycle first, the Heritage Softail, sitting in the center of the concrete floor under full work lights, the original carburetor gleaming in its proper position, the engine bay clean and correct and complete. The cheap replacements were gone. The rubber grips were gone. Every component that Vernon Slade had swapped out in the dark was back where Everett Arlen had put it. Vernon's step faltered. One micro-stumble, the left foot catching the right heel for a fraction of a second. He recovered immediately. But the 4 men in the garage saw it. And Vernon knew they saw it. And the temperature in the room shifted the way air pressure shifts before something detonates. "You've done some work on the bike," Vernon said. "We have. I should mention, Any unauthorized modifications to a vehicle under a pending purchase agreement could complicate the transaction. There's no pending purchase agreement, Mr. Slade. There is, actually. I filed the transfer paperwork with the county yesterday, with a signature Marla never gave you. For the first time, Vernon's smile didn't just thin. It flickered, a moth too close to a flame, wings stuttering. Mrs. Arlen signed the preliminary intent form during my last visit. That constitutes nothing, and you know it. Ammon pushed off the doorframe and walked to the workbench. He didn't hurry. He moved the way a man moves when he knows exactly where every piece is on the board and he's decided to stop waiting. Let me show you what we found during our unauthorized modifications. He picked up the first evidence bag. Inside was the aftermarket carburetor, the $40 piece of Chinese junk with no serial number, no markings, no provenance. This was installed on Everett Arlen's motorcycle. It's a generic replacement with no manufacturer identification. The original carburetor, an S&S Super E Series, serial number 4471-SS-97, documented in Everett's maintenance log with full service history, was removed. He set the bag down and picked up the second one. The original carburetor, chrome catching the work light, the inventory sticker visible through the clear plastic. This is the original. We found it hidden beneath the workbench in this garage. It carries Everett Arlen's documented serial number. Ammon turned the bag so the sticker faced Vernon. It also carries an inventory code, VS Automotive number 0217. Vernon's face went through a transformation that Ammon had seen before, on the faces of men caught in lies so fundamental that their entire architecture of confidence begins to fail from the foundation up. The tan seemed to drain first, leaving the skin beneath it sallow and exposed. Then the jaw tightened. Then the eyes went flat. The survival response of a man whose brain is scrambling for an exit strategy while his body tries to maintain the fiction of calm. I can explain that. I'm sure you can. But before you do, Ammon set the bag down and picked up the printed screenshot from Slade's website. This is a listing from your website, VS Automotive and Vintage Cycle Acquisitions. It advertises a 1997 Heritage Softail Classic. Same year, same model, same color as the motorcycle in this garage, for sale at $22,500. Full original components. Documented service history. He held the printout 6 inches from Vernon's face. You listed this bike for sale before you owned it, at 56 times the price you offered its owner, using the parts you stole from it as selling points. Vernon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His eyes darted to the garage door, measuring the distance to his car the way a cornered animal measures the distance to the tree line. Dutch was standing in the doorway. 240 pounds of gray ponytail and absolute silence. His arms crossed, his body filling the exit the way a boulder fills a river. Behind him, Cutter and Felix stood on either side of the driveway like sentinels, not threatening, not advancing, just present in the way that large, scarred men in leather vests are present when they want you to understand that the geography of the situation has changed. I want to speak to my lawyer, Vernon said. You're welcome to call anyone you like, but first there's something else. Ammon reached into his vest pocket and produced the manila envelope. Everett's envelope, the one Felix had found taped beneath the seat frame. He opened it slowly, deliberately, the way a dealer turns cards when the hand is already won. He removed the Polaroid photographs and fanned them across the workbench. These are photographs taken by Everett Arlen before his death. They document every original component on this motorcycle. Serial numbers visible, condition documented. They match his maintenance log entry by entry. Then Ammon unfolded the note. He didn't read it aloud. He held it out to Vernon the way you hold a mirror in front of someone who needs to see what they've become. Vernon read it. His eyes moved across the lines. The man who came to appraise the bike is not honest. And something happened to his face that went beyond embarrassment or fear. It was the expression of a man realizing that the dead can still testify, that a mechanic with a pen and a flashlight and 3 weeks left to live had built a case against him from inside a garage that smelled of oil and goodbye. That could have been written by anyone. It's in the same handwriting as 20 years of maintenance records. A handwriting expert will confirm that in about 40 minutes. You can't just, Mr. Slade. Ammon's voice dropped. Not louder, lower. The way thunder gets lower right before the lightning arrives close enough to taste. You stole components from a dying man's motorcycle. You sabotaged his machine to destroy its value. You pressured his widow into selling for a fraction of what it's worth. You forged her signature on a county transfer document, and you did all of this while a man's 8-year-old daughter slept 20 feet away, holding the last piece of her father she had left. Vernon's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the concrete floor with a sound like a gavel. I want to leave. Then leave. But understand something first. Ammon stepped closer, close enough that Vernon could smell the coffee and cigarette smoke and rain-soaked leather, the scent of a man who'd spent the entire night dismantling a lie. We have the evidence. We have the photographs. We have the note. We have your inventory sticker on a stolen part in a dead man's garage. And we have a forensic accountant who is, right now, pulling every business filing, every estate acquisition, and every probate court record associated with VS Automotive for the last 7 years. Vernon's face went gray. 7 years, Ammon repeated. Inventory code 0217 means there are at least 216 other items in your system. We intend to find every single one of them, and every family you took them from. The garage was silent. The morning light had strengthened, pushing through the open door in a wide sheet of pale gold that made the dust motes visible. Thousands of tiny particles suspended in the air, like witnesses waiting to be called. Vernon bent down and picked up his briefcase with fingers that trembled in a way he couldn't control. You're making a mistake, he said. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I've been dealing with men like you my whole life. You just usually wear different shoes. Vernon walked toward the door. Dutch didn't move. For 3 seconds, Vernon stood in front of Dutch like a man standing in front of a wall, and neither of them spoke, and neither of them blinked, and the air between them was so compressed that Cutter could feel it on his skin from 10 feet away. Then Dutch stepped aside, the same way Ammon had stepped aside. Not retreat. Passage. The kind of passage that says you can leave, but you can't escape. Vernon walked to his Lincoln. He opened the door. He sat down behind the wheel. And for 12 seconds, he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, staring through the windshield at the garage where 4 bikers and 1 dead man's evidence were rearranging the rest of his life. Then the engine started. The Lincoln backed out. The tires found the road. And Vernon Slade disappeared down Hadley Road in a car that still smelled like leather and cologne and the last vestiges of a confidence that would never fully reform. Ammon watched the car go. He finished his cigarette, dropped the butt on the gravel, and ground it out with his boot heel. He'll call someone, Dutch said. I know. Not a lawyer, someone else, someone with weight. I know that too. You're not worried? I'm always worried, but worried's not the same as stopped. Inside the house, Marla was sitting at the kitchen table with Lottie on her lap. The girl had her arms around her mother's neck, face buried in the flannel shirt, body limp with the exhaustion of a child who had been running on adrenaline and hope for 12 straight hours. Marla looked up when Ammon came in. Is he gone? For now. What does for now mean? It means he's going to come back, not in person, through paperwork, through contacts, through whatever system he's built to protect himself. Men like Slade don't operate alone. They have accountants, lawyers, connections at the county level. The forged signature tells me he's done this before and gotten away with it, which means someone in the system either isn't looking or is choosing not to. Marla's arms tightened around Lottie. So what do we do? We build a case he can't bury. Ada, the woman I called earlier, she's already pulling records, but we need more. We need other victims, other families he's done this to. How do you find them? His website lists 43 motorcycles. Every one of them was acquired from a private collection. Those collections had owners. Those owners had families. And those families had the same conversation you almost had last night. Sign here, take $400, walk away from something that's worth 50 times more. Ammon sat down across from her. The kitchen smelled like coffee and rain and the faint chemical sweetness of the WD-40 that had soaked into his vest during the night. His hands were on the table, scarred, grease-stained, steady. This is the part where I have to be honest with you, Marla. What we've done so far, finding the evidence, restoring the bike, confronting Slade, that was the easy part. What comes next is harder. Slade is going to push back. He's going to claim the inventory sticker was a cataloging error. He's going to say the carburetor swap was a standard assessment procedure. He's going to have a lawyer draft a letter that makes everything we found sound like a misunderstanding. And he's going to try to make you feel like you're the one causing problems. I've been feeling like I'm the one causing problems for 11 months. One more round won't kill me. Ammon looked at her, really looked. And what he saw was something he'd learned to recognize over decades of dealing with people who'd been pushed to the wall. The moment when fear stops being the primary operating system and gets replaced by something older and harder. Not courage. Courage is what you feel when you choose to face danger. This was different. This was the elimination of alternatives. Marla Arlen wasn't brave. She was cornered. And cornered people don't run. They calculate. Okay, Ammon said, then we work. His phone buzzed at 9:23. Ada Kane's name on the screen. He answered on the first ring. Talk to me. Vernon Slade isn't Vernon Slade. Ammon's hand went still on the table. Across from him, Marla saw his face change and her spine straightened. Explain. VS Automotive is registered under the name Vernon P. Slade. Business license issued 4 years ago in Calvary Flats. Before that, nothing. No Vernon Slade in the state tax records, no driver's license under that name before 2022, no credit history, no property records. The man didn't exist before he opened that shop. Alias. Deep alias. Well built. He's got a social security number that passes surface checks, but the issuance date doesn't match his stated age by about 12 years. Whoever built this identity knew what they were doing. Ammon closed his eyes. The kitchen around him, the tired walls, the humming refrigerator, the sound of Lottie breathing against her mother's chest, seemed to recede, replaced by the cold internal architecture of a situation that had just doubled in size. So who is he? That's the part you're not going to like. Ada paused. Not for drama. For accuracy. Ada Kane didn't do drama. She did precision, and when she paused, it meant the next sentence had been verified 3 times, and she still didn't want to say it. I cross-referenced his business address with county property records. The building that houses VS Automotive is owned by a holding company called Ridgeline Asset Recovery. Ridgeline has 6 other properties in 3 counties, 3 storage facilities, 2 auction houses, and a bonded warehouse. The registered agent for Ridgeline is a law firm in Little Rock called Teague & Associates. So Slade works for a company. Slade is the company's field operator, but here's what matters. Ridgeline Asset Recovery doesn't just buy motorcycles. They buy anything of value from estates, bankruptcies, and foreclosures. Motorcycles, cars, boats, farm equipment, antiques. Their model is identical to what you described. Appraise low, acquire cheap, resell at market value. And their client list, the people they sell to, includes 3 major vintage vehicle auction houses and at least 2 overseas buyers. How many acquisitions? In 4 years, over 300 documented transactions. Total estimated resale value based on comparable listings exceeds $4 million. Ammon opened his eyes. $4 million. Conservative estimate. And the acquisition cost, what they paid the original owners, totals less than $190,000 across all transactions. That's a 95% margin on assets taken from people in financial distress. The kitchen was so quiet that Ammon could hear the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Each second falling into the silence like a stone into still water. This isn't a con man, Ammon said. This is an operation. A well-funded, well-organized operation with legal infrastructure, a corporate shield, and at least 4 years of successful predation. Vernon Slade, whatever his real name is a procurement agent. He finds the targets, performs the appraisals, executes the component swaps, and closes the acquisitions. The company handles the resale. The law firm handles the paperwork. Everyone gets paid, and the families get $400 for things that are worth a fortune. Dutch had come inside during the call. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, dripping rainwater onto the linoleum, his face showing the expression of a man who'd just heard the floor crack beneath his feet and was trying to decide which direction to fall. "Did you hear that?" Ammon asked him. "Every word. This isn't one guy scamming widows. No, it's a machine, and we just jammed a wrench into it. Which means whoever owns that machine is going to send someone to pull the wrench out." Ammon looked at Marla. She was holding Lottie tighter now, her face pale, her jaw locked. She'd heard everything. The exhaustion in her eyes had been replaced by something raw, the animal clarity of a mother calculating threats. "You should know what you're dealing with," Ammon said. "This isn't a small-time con anymore. Slade works for people with resources, legal resources, financial resources, and possibly the kind of resources that don't show up in court filings. Are you telling me to stop?" "I'm telling you what's real." Marla looked down at Lottie. The girl's fingers were curled around the air cleaner cover on the table, even while she dozed against her mother's chest. Even in half-sleep, she held onto the piece of metal that said, "For Lottie, when the road gets quiet." "Everett left that note because he knew something was wrong and he couldn't stop it," Marla said. "He was dying and he still tried. He hid evidence inside his own motorcycle because he believed someone would come. I am not going to be the person who makes his last act meaningless." Ammon nodded slowly. "Then we need to move. Fast. Before Ridgeline figures out what we have and starts scrubbing their records." He called Ada back. "How quickly can you get me a list of the other families? Names, locations, acquisition dates?" "I've already started. Property records are public. Probate filings are public. Cross-referencing against Ridgeline's transaction log will take time, but I can have a preliminary list by tonight. Focus on the most recent acquisitions first. Those families will remember the details. The older ones will have faded." "Understood. And Ammon?" "Yeah?" "Teague and Associates, the law firm. Their managing partner is a man named Cole Teague. He has a reputation in Little Rock for making problems disappear. And I don't mean through litigation." "Meaning what?" "Meaning 3 complaints against Ridgeline Asset Recovery have been filed with the State Attorney General's office in the last 2 years. All 3 were withdrawn before investigation. The complainants declined to explain why. The implication hung in the air like smoke in a closed room. They were pressured," Ammon said, "or paid, or threatened, or some combination that made continuing the complaint more expensive than the asset they lost." Ammon ended the call. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for 15 seconds. A long time to stare at nothing when every person in the room is watching you and waiting for the next move. Then he looked at Dutch. "I need you to do something you're going to hate." "I already hate everything about this morning. Specifics won't make it worse." "Call Mercer." Dutch's expression went through 3 stages in 2 seconds. Surprise, resistance, and then the flat, resigned acceptance of a man who understands that the right tool for a terrible job is sometimes a terrible person. "Mercer," Dutch repeated. "He's the only one with contacts inside Teague and Associates. He did contract work for them in 2019. He did contract work for them because he was running their skip tracing operation. The man repossessed cars from single mothers for a living, Ammon." "I know what he did. I also know he stopped doing it, and I know why." "Because we made him stop. Because his daughter asked him to stop. We just provided the context." Dutch rubbed his face with both hands, his palms scraping against 2 days of stubble with a sound like sandpaper on wood. Mercer burned his bridges with Teague when he walked out. They're not going to talk to him. I don't need them to talk to him. I need him to tell us where the bodies are buried, figuratively, where the files are, where the real transaction records live. Because what Ada can pull from public filings is the surface. The real numbers, the ones that show how much these families were cheated, those are inside Ridgeline's internal books. And Mercer knows how that company keeps its books because he used to be part of the system that generated them. Dutch was quiet for a long moment. Through the kitchen window, the morning light was strengthening, burning off the last of the storm clouds, turning the wet world outside into something that glittered and steamed. "If I call Mercer, he's going to want to know why. Tell him the truth. The truth is that we're four tired bikers standing in a dead man's kitchen trying to fight a company with a legal team and a $4 million portfolio. He's going to laugh. Let him laugh. Then tell him about the note. What note? Everett's note. The one that says, "Please protect my girls." Tell him a dying man hid a message inside his own motorcycle because he knew the world was coming for his family and he couldn't stop it. Tell him that man's daughter walked 3 miles barefoot through a rainstorm to find a stranger who could help. And then ask Mercer if he wants to be on the side of the machine or the side of the kid. Dutch stared at Ammon. "You're a manipulative bastard. I learned from watching you. That's fair?" Dutch pulled out his phone and walked outside. Through the window, Ammon watched him pace the muddy yard, phone pressed to his ear, free hand gesturing at the sky as though arguing with the clouds. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. When Dutch came back inside, his face carried the expression of a man who'd just done something he wasn't sure was brave or stupid and had decided the distinction didn't matter. Mercer's in, but he has conditions. Name them. He wants a meeting, face-to-face, not here, neutral ground. He says he has information about Ridgeline that goes beyond business fraud, and he won't put it on a phone line. What kind of information? He wouldn't say, but his exact words were, "Tell Ammon that Vernon Slade isn't the worst thing Ridgeline has in the field. He's the polite one." The kitchen went silent. Lottie stirred against Marla's chest, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around the room with the disoriented clarity of a child waking up in the middle of something she can feel but can't name. "Mommy, what's happening?" Marla smoothed her daughter's hair. Her hand was steady, but her eyes were not. "Some people are helping us, baby." "The motorcycle men?" "Yes." "Are they staying?" Marla looked at Ammon. The question traveled from daughter to mother to biker in the span of a single breath, and when it arrived, it carried the weight of everything that had happened since a barefoot girl walked out of a rainstorm holding a piece of a dead man's heart. Ammon looked at Lottie. Her eyes were dark and clear and old in the way that only children who've buried a parent can be old, carrying knowledge that no child should have to carry, wearing it the way soldiers wear dog tags, close to the skin, impossible to remove. "Yeah," he said. "We're staying." His phone rang. Ada's number again. He answered. "Ammon, I need you to listen to me very carefully." Her voice was different. The professional calm was still there, but beneath it was something he'd only heard once before. The night she'd called to tell him that the Collinsville case had been compromised and that people were coming. "What is it?" Cole Teague just filed an emergency motion with the county court. He's requesting a temporary seizure order for the Arlen motorcycle on behalf of Ridgeline Asset Recovery, citing a pre-existing purchase agreement and unauthorized interference by third parties. On what grounds? On the grounds that the signed purchase agreement, the one with Marla's forged signature, constitutes a binding contract, and that your interference constitutes tortious interference with a business transaction. The motion was filed 17 minutes ago. A county deputy will be dispatched to execute the seizure order within the hour. They can't seize property based on a forged signature. They can seize it based on a signed order from a judge, and the judge who signed it is named Harold Finney. The same Harold Finney whose campaign fund received $12,000 last year from a PAC controlled by, let me guess, Ridgeline Asset Recovery. Ammon's knuckles went white around the phone. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 40 minutes, maybe less. The deputy's jurisdiction is the county sheriff's office, and they won't wait for an objection hearing before executing the order. They'll take the bike first and let the court sort it out later. By the time you challenge the seizure, the motorcycle will be in Ridgeline's bonded warehouse. The original parts will be stripped and cataloged into their inventory, and the provenance that makes it valuable, Everett's notebook, the serial numbers, the service history, will be separated from the machine and destroyed. They'll dismantle the evidence? That's the point. That's always been the point. This is how they handle complications. They don't fight you in court. They take the physical evidence, put it behind a locked door, and dare you to prove what it was worth without it." Ammon hung up. He looked at the room, at Dutch standing in the doorway with rain still dripping off his jacket, at Marla holding Lottie in the kitchen chair, at the morning light falling across a table covered in evidence that was about to become worthless if a deputy with a court order reached the garage before they could act. 40 minutes, he said. We have 40 minutes before a county deputy arrives with a seizure order for the motorcycle. Marla's face went white. They can do that? They're already doing it. Slade called his people. His people called a judge. The judge signed an order. The system is moving. Dutch straightened. Then we move faster. We load the bike on the truck and get it out of here before... If we move the bike, we're in contempt of a court order. They'll arrest Marla. They'll charge us with obstruction. And every piece of evidence we've gathered becomes inadmissible because it was collected during an illegal act. So we can't move it, and we can't keep it. Not exactly. Ammon walked to the workbench. He picked up Everett's notebook, the photographs, the note, the carburetor with the inventory sticker. He picked up every piece of evidence they'd gathered over the night and placed them in a single pile. The seizure order is for the motorcycle, not the documentation, not the photographs, not the hidden note, not the carburetor that was found separate from the bike. Cutter looked up. The carburetor was under the workbench, not attached to the motorcycle. Exactly. It's a separate item, found in the garage, not on the vehicle. The court order specifies the motorcycle. It doesn't specify loose parts found on the premises. Dutch's eyes narrowed. That's a thin line, Ammon. Thin lines are the only kind we've got. Ammon turned to Marla. He knelt in front of her, bringing himself to eye level the way he'd done with Lottie at the diner, making himself smaller so she could feel larger. Marla, I need you to listen. A deputy is coming. He's going to have a piece of paper that says he can take the bike, and you're going to let him take it. No. You're going to let him take it because the bike is not the case. The bike is a machine. Machines can be recovered. But the evidence, the notebook, the photographs, the note, the carburetor with Slade's sticker, that's the weapon. And weapons don't go in the enemy's hands. Her eyes were wet. Her jaw was shaking. But she was listening. We take every piece of evidence out of this garage before the deputy arrives. We photograph the motorcycle one more time. Every angle, every component, every serial number visible, and we hand those photographs to Ada along with everything else. The physical evidence stays in our custody. The bike goes with the deputy. And then we use what Everett left us to burn Ridgeline asset recovery to the ground from the outside. Marla looked at the garage through the kitchen window. The Heritage Softail was sitting there under the work lights, blue paint glowing, engine whole, carburetor breathing. A machine her husband had loved, a machine her daughter pressed her ear against to hear a heartbeat that wasn't there anymore. Lottie looked up at her mother. Are they taking Daddy's bike? Marla's hand tightened on her daughter's arm. She looked at Ammon. She looked at the evidence on the table. She looked at the clock. 34 minutes, maybe less. Take everything, she said. Every photograph, every page, every piece of metal with a serial number on it. Get it out of this house. And then get my daughter somewhere safe. Ammon stood up. Dutch, the truck. Pull it to the back of the garage. Cutter, Felix, bag everything that isn't bolted to the motorcycle. Move. The room exploded into motion. Boots on linoleum, hands grabbing evidence bags. The sound of zippers and latches and the rustle of leather in motion. Dutch was out the door first, keys already in hand, his body moving with the urgency of a man who'd spent decades responding to situations where minutes meant survival. Ammon pulled out his phone and dialed Ada one more time. We're sending you everything digitally, photographs, scans, document images. I need you to have a complete copy of every piece of evidence in a secure location before that deputy crosses the property line. I'm ready. Send it. Cutter was in the garage photographing the motorcycle from every conceivable angle. Top, bottom, left, right, engine bay, serial plate, VIN tag, every bolt and gasket and cable visible under the work lights. His phone's camera clicked in rapid succession, each image a bullet being loaded into a weapon that wouldn't be fired today but would be devastating when it was. Felix packed the physical evidence into a hard-shell case from his saddlebag. The kind of case that was designed to survive a crash at 80 miles per hour. The carburetor went in first, wrapped in a clean shop towel. Then the notebook. Then the photographs. Then Everett's note, sealed in a plastic bag with the envelope it came from. Ammon watched them work, and somewhere beneath the adrenaline and the planning and the ticking clock, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. The specific, terrible weight of a promise made to a dead man he never met. Please protect my girls. Outside, the sound of tires on wet gravel reached the kitchen, not the truck. Something else. Something coming from the direction of the main road. Ammon went to the front window. The county sheriff's cruiser was turning onto Hadley Road, light bar dark but headlights on, moving slowly, deliberately, the way law enforcement moves when they're serving paper, not chasing suspects. He checked the time. They were 22 minutes early, and behind the cruiser, following at a distance of 30 yards, was a second vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows and no plates, moving in the cruiser's wake like a shadow attached to a body that didn't know it was being followed. Ammon's blood went cold. "Dutch," he said, his voice carrying across the kitchen with the flat, quiet authority of a man giving orders in a place where there is no time left to explain why. "They're here, and they didn't come alone." The cruiser rolled to a stop at the end of the driveway. The black SUV stopped 30 yards behind it on Hadley Road, engine idling, windows dark, exhaust curling into the cold morning air like breath from something that preferred not to be seen. Ammon had 11 seconds. He used every one of them. "Felix, the case. Out the back, through the tree line. Do not stop until you reach the gas station on County Road 4. Wait there." Felix didn't ask questions. He grabbed the hard shell case containing every piece of evidence they'd gathered. The carburetor, the notebook, the photographs, Everett's note, and went through the back door without a sound. His boots hit the wet grass, and then he was gone, moving through the tree line behind the Arlen property with the low, silent speed of a man who'd spent years learning how to disappear in terrain that wanted to kill him. "Cutter, the phone. Every photograph you took, send them to Ada, right now. All of them." Cutter was already swiping through his gallery, selecting images, attaching them to a message thread. His fingers moved with the same precision he used on engine components. No wasted motion, no hesitation, every touch deliberate. "Dutch, you're with me. Front porch." "And Marla?" Ammon looked at her. She was standing now, Lottie behind her, one hand gripping her daughter's shoulder with the unconscious force of a woman who had stopped thinking about anything except the physical distance between her child and the front door. "Stay inside. Don't open the door. Don't answer questions. If anyone who isn't me or Dutch asks you to sign something, you say one word. Lawyer. Nothing else." "I don't have a lawyer." "You will before the day is over. Right now the word is enough." He walked through the living room and opened the front door. The morning air hit his face. Cold, clean, carrying the metallic smell of wet gravel and the faint chemical tang of the cruiser's exhaust. The sky was the color of old dishwater, low clouds pressing down on the rooftops like a ceiling that had settled too close to the ground. Deputy Wayne Haskell stepped out of the cruiser. He was mid-40s, soft around the middle, wearing the tan uniform of the county sheriff's department with a service belt that looked like it had never been drawn from in the line of duty. His hat was in his hand. That detail registered. A deputy who removes his hat before serving a seizure order is a deputy who feels uncomfortable with what he's about to do. "Mr. Rook?" "Deputy, I've got a court order signed by Judge Finney authorizing the temporary seizure of a 1997 Harley-Davidson Heritage Softail Classic, registered to the estate of Everett J. Arlen. The order names Mrs. Marla Arlen as the custodial party and directs surrender of the vehicle to county custody pending resolution of a contractual dispute filed by Ridgeline Asset Recovery." Haskell held out the paperwork. His hand was steady, but his voice carried the particular flatness of a man reading words he didn't write and might not agree with. Ammon took the papers. He didn't read them. He already knew what they said. Instead, he looked past Haskell to the black SUV idling on Hadley Road. "Who's in the truck?" Haskell glanced over his shoulder. Something crossed his face, not quite fear, but adjacent to it. The expression of a man who'd been told to do a job and had shown up to find the job had more moving parts than he'd been briefed on. "That's not part of my detail, sir." "But they followed you here." "I can't speak to that." "Can't or won't?" Haskell's jaw tightened. He put his hat back on. Down. The gesture of a man retreating behind his uniform because the conversation had moved into territory his training didn't cover. "Mr. Rook, I'm here to execute a lawful court order. I'm not looking for trouble." Neither am I. But Trouble seems to know this address. Dutch appeared on the porch beside Ammon. His size alone changed the geometry of the conversation. Haskell's weight shifted to his back foot, a micro-adjustment that was pure instinct, the body's way of creating distance before the brain decides whether distance is necessary. "The motorcycle is in the garage," Ammon said. "Unlocked. You're welcome to execute your order, but I want something noted in your report." "What's that?" "The court order specifies the motorcycle only. There are personal items in that garage, tools, equipment, maintenance records, that are the private property of Mrs. Arlen and are not included in the seizure order. Anything removed from the premises beyond the vehicle itself constitutes unlawful seizure of personal property, and we will file a formal complaint with the county and state." Haskell blinked. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected resistance, shouting, maybe, or the kind of silent menace that men in leather vests were supposed to project. Instead, he was getting procedure, language, the careful clinical vocabulary of a man who knew exactly where the legal lines were drawn and intended to stand on the right side of them while making it extremely clear where the wrong side began. "Noted," Haskell said. "I also want the condition of the motorcycle documented before removal. Photographs. Written description. Serial numbers of all visible components. If that vehicle arrives at its destination in any condition other than the condition it left this garage, we'll know." That's not standard. Neither is serving a seizure order based on a forged signature at 9 o'clock in the morning on behalf of a company that's under investigation for systematic fraud against estate beneficiaries. Haskell stared at him. "Under investigation by whom?" "Give it 48 hours. You'll find out." Haskell was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his cruiser and pulled out a digital camera. Department issue, scuffed and battered. The kind of camera that usually photographed fender benders and property damage. "I'll document the condition, for my own records." "Appreciated." They walked to the garage. Ammon opened the door. The Heritage Softail sat in the center of the floor under the work lights, exactly where it had been all night. Blue paint catching the fluorescent glow, chrome reflecting the faces of the men who had spent hours giving it back its original heart. Haskell photographed the motorcycle from 8 angles. He wrote the VIN number in his notebook. He noted the condition of the paint, the tires, the engine bay. His camera clicked with the methodical rhythm of a man building a record he suspected might matter later in ways he couldn't fully articulate yet. While Haskell worked, the black SUV's driver's side window lowered 3 inches, just enough to see the outline of a face but not the features. Watching. Ammon watched it back, his cigarette burning untouched between his fingers, smoke rising into the morning air like a signal to no one. "I'll need a flatbed," Haskell said. "I can't ride it out." "I'll have our tow truck pull it. Dutch, bring the F550 around." Dutch nodded and disappeared around the house. 2 minutes later, the battered Ford tow truck rumbled into the driveway, its diesel engine clattering with the mechanical irritability of a vehicle that had been worked too hard for too many years and had developed opinions about it. They loaded the Harley in silence. Ammon and Dutch guided it up the flatbed ramp while Haskell supervised. The bike rolled easily, wheels turning, frame level, engine whole. It went onto the flatbed the way a prisoner walks into a courtroom, upright, intact, carrying the evidence of its own story in every component. Ammon strapped it down. He tightened the ratchets until the bike was immobile, checking each strap twice with hands that moved from muscle memory. When he finished, he stood on the flatbed and looked down at the motorcycle for a long moment. Then he placed his hand on the gas tank. It wasn't a gesture he planned. It came from the same place the decision had come from at May's Diner. The place below thought, below strategy, below the machinery of planning and execution. The place where a man's hand knows what to do because the thing it's touching matters in a way that language can't frame. "We'll get you back," he said. Quietly. To the bike. To Everett. To the idea of a man who had loved a machine enough to hide a message inside it for whoever came next. He climbed down off the flatbed. Haskell's truck pulled out first, the flatbed following on a tow chain, the Harley riding backward down Hadley Road, facing the Arlen house as it receded, as if looking over its shoulder at the garage where it had lived for 20 years. The black SUV waited until both vehicles had passed, then pulled a U-turn and followed. No signal, no hesitation. The shadow reattaching itself to the body it was assigned to. Ammon watched all three vehicles disappear around the curve. Then he turned and looked at Dutch. How long before Felix reaches the gas station? 10 minutes on foot, 15 if the tree line is muddy. Call him, make sure the evidence is secure, then call Mercer. Tell him the meeting just became urgent. Where? The Cornerstone. 3 o'clock. And tell him to bring whatever he knows about Ridgeline's enforcement arm, because whoever was in that SUV wasn't a lawyer. Dutch pulled out his phone. Ammon walked back inside. Marla was standing in the kitchen doorway, Lottie pressed against her leg, both of them watching the empty driveway through the living room window. The space where the flatbed had been was a rectangle of wet gravel, darker than the surrounding ground, shaped like a wound. They took it, Marla said. They took the bike. They didn't take the case. What's the difference if I can't get it back? The difference is that a bike can be replaced. Evidence can't. And right now, every piece of evidence that proves what Vernon Slade did is in our hands, not theirs. That's the only advantage we need. Marla turned away from the window. Her eyes were dry. Her face had the drawn, hollowed quality of someone running on reserves that were measured in hours, not days. Lottie needs to eat. She needs to sleep in a real bed. She needs to not be in a house where men in uniforms come to take her father's things. I know. Dutch's sister lives in Greeley, 30 miles east. Clean house, fenced yard, 2 dogs. Lottie would be safe there. And me? You're coming with us. To the meeting at 3 o'clock. Because the people we're about to sit down with need to hear what happened from you, not from me. From the woman Vernon Slade visited at 3 in the morning. From the mother whose daughter walked barefoot through a rainstorm. Your voice is the weapon they can't build a legal defense against. Marla looked at Lottie. The girl was staring at the empty driveway, her face unreadable. Not sad, not angry, but vacant in the way that children go vacant when the world takes something from them that they don't have the language to grieve for yet. Lottie, the girl looked up. You're going to stay with some nice people for a little while. They have dogs. I don't want dogs. I want Daddy's bike. I know, baby. We're going to get it back. Promise? Marla looked at Ammon. He held her gaze. And in that look, something transferred. Not a guarantee, because guarantees are luxuries that honest people can't afford, but something harder and more durable. A commitment. The kind that men make not with words, but with the specific, irreversible act of showing up when the cost of showing up exceeds the cost of walking away. Promise, Marla said. They moved Lottie within the hour. Dutch drove the tow truck with Lottie in the passenger seat, the air cleaner cover in her lap, wrapped in the same dish towel she'd carried through the rainstorm. She didn't cry when they left the house. She didn't wave. She pressed her face against the window and watched the garage get smaller until the road curved and it disappeared. And then she turned forward and stared at the highway with eyes that were older than any child's eyes should ever be. Ammon rode his Road King behind the truck. Cutter followed on his Dyna. The 2 bikes flanked the F550 like escorts. Not for show, but because there was a black SUV somewhere on the road network of this county, and until they knew who was inside it and what it wanted, no vehicle carrying Lottie Arlen traveled without riders on its wings. Dutch's sister, a sturdy woman named Peg, who asked no questions and made grilled cheese sandwiches with the silent efficiency of someone who had long ago learned that feeding people was a form of protection, met them at the door. Lottie went inside without looking back. The dogs, a beagle and a mutt with one ear, circled her feet and sniffed her hands, and something in the girl's posture softened for the first time in hours, like a held breath finally releasing. Ammon watched through the screen door until Lottie was on the couch with the beagle in her lap and the air cleaner cover on the cushion beside her. Then he turned away. She's safe, he said to Marla. For now. For now is all we ever get. The Cornerstone was a bar that had stopped pretending to be a bar 20 years ago and had become, through gradual surrender, a place where people met to discuss things they couldn't discuss anywhere else. It sat on a gravel lot off Route 22 between a farm supply store and an abandoned laundromat. The sign out front hadn't been illuminated in a decade. The door had no lock because there was nothing inside worth stealing except information, and information doesn't respond to deadbolts. Mercer Hale was already there when they arrived at 2:47 p.m. He was sitting in the back booth, the one against the wall, facing the door, because Mercer had spent 46 years on the planet, and at least 30 of them had involved situations where having a wall at your back was the difference between going home and going somewhere else. He was smaller than Ammon expected people to remember. 5'8", wiry, with the kind of compact muscularity that comes from manual labor, not gyms. His hair was cut short, military short, even though his military service had ended in a medical discharge 12 years ago that he didn't talk about and nobody asked about. His hands were wrapped around a cup of black coffee, and his eyes, gray, flat, missing the performative warmth that most people install in their faces for social purposes, tracked Ammon, Dutch, Cutter, and Marla as they entered the bar with the automated precision of a surveillance system that had never been turned off. Mercer. Ammon. Thank you for coming. Don't thank me yet. Sit down. They sat. Marla took the chair closest to the wall. Instinct, not strategy. The seating choice of someone who'd spent the last 12 hours learning that threats come from directions you don't expect. Dutch and Cutter flanked the booth. Ammon sat directly across from Mercer. Tell me about Ridgeline, Ammon said. First tell me what you think you know. Shell Company operates through a front called VS Automotive. Field agent named Vernon Slade. Alias, real name unknown. Business model is predatory acquisition of high-value assets from financially distressed families. Widows, bankruptcies, foreclosures. Appraise low, sabotage if necessary. Acquire cheap, resell at market value through auction houses and overseas buyers. Legal cover provided by Teague and Associates out of Little Rock. 4 years of operations, 300-plus transactions, estimated $4 million in resale revenue against less than $200,000 in acquisition costs. Mercer listened without expression. When Ammon finished, he took a sip of coffee. That's the brochure version. The real version is worse. How much worse? Ridgeline Asset Recovery is a subsidiary, one of 7. The parent entity is called Greystone Capital Partners, registered in Delaware, operated out of nowhere, controlled by a man named Leland Marsh. I worked for Ridgeline for 11 months. In that time, I processed over 100 skip traces and asset recoveries. I never met Marsh. Nobody meets Marsh. He communicates through Teague, who communicates through field operators like Slade. The structure is designed so that no single person at the bottom can see the whole machine. But you saw it. I saw enough to leave, and I saw enough to know that leaving didn't make me safe. It just made me quiet. What did you see? Mercer set his coffee down. He folded his hands on the table, a deliberate gesture, the act of a man physically containing himself before speaking. Ridgeline doesn't just buy motorcycles. They buy anything that can be undervalued and resold. Vehicles, equipment, art, antiques. But the motorcycle division is their most profitable arm because vintage bikes are the easiest assets to manipulate. The market is subjective. Appraisals are opinion-based. Provenance is often undocumented. And the sellers, widows, children, elderly people, almost never know what they have. We know all that. You don't know this. 18 months ago, I processed a skip trace on a family in Pine Bluff. Widow. 2 kids. Dead husband left behind a 1965 panhead worth $60,000. Slade appraised it at $800. The widow refused to sell. 3 weeks later, the motorcycle was stolen from her garage. No break-in, no forced entry. The police report listed it as an unsolved burglary. Mercer paused. 6 weeks after that, a 1965 panhead appeared on a European auction site, sold for $71,000 to a collector in Hamburg. The listing agent was a company registered in Luxembourg. I traced the registration. It linked back to Greystone Capital Partners. The booth was silent. Behind the bar, a television was playing a muted baseball game, the flickering light casting moving shadows across the wall that nobody noticed. They stole it, Marla said. Her voice was flat, not shocked, resigned. The voice of a woman who had crossed the threshold where new horror stops being surprising and becomes confirmational. They stole it after the legal approach failed. That's the pattern. Slade tries to buy it clean. If the owner refuses, pressure escalates. Late-night visits, forged paperwork, county filings. If all of that fails, Mercer spread his hands. The asset disappears, and it surfaces somewhere else, in someone else's name, in a market where the original owner will never see it. How many times? That I can document? 7. That I suspect? 30 or more. Dutch leaned forward. You're saying if Marla had refused to sell and we hadn't been here, they would have stolen the bike. I'm saying the seizure order was step 1. The SUV was step 2. If the legal mechanism works, they use it. If it doesn't, they have other mechanisms. What kind of other mechanisms? Mercer looked at Dutch with an expression that contained no ambiguity whatsoever. The kind that drives black SUVs with no plates. Ammon's phone buzzed on the table. A text from Ada. He read it twice, then set the phone face down on the table with a deliberateness that made everyone in the booth stop breathing. Ada found the complaint records, the 3 families who filed complaints against Ridgeline with the state attorney general and then withdrew. He paused. All 3 families experienced property damage within a week of filing. One had a garage fire, one had a vehicle stolen, one had their house broken into while they were at work. Nothing was taken in the break-in, but the family's computer and filing cabinet were destroyed. They destroy the evidence and intimidate the witnesses, Cutter said, and then the complaints get withdrawn, because the families understand the message. Pursue this, and the cost will be more than financial. Marla's hands were flat on the table. Her fingers were white. She was staring at a spot on the wall behind Mercer's head with the concentrated focus of someone doing math, not numbers, but consequences. Calculating the distance between where she was and where this road led. My daughter is in a house 30 miles from here with 2 dogs and a woman she's never met, Marla said. My husband's motorcycle is in county custody because a judge was paid to sign a piece of paper. There's a car with no plates following law enforcement officers to my home, and you're telling me the people behind all of this have burned garages and broken into houses when families tried to fight back? Yes, Mercer said. And you're telling me this because you think I should stop. I'm telling you this because you need to know the cost of not stopping. Marla looked at Ammon. You told me this morning that I decide, that it's my call. Is that still true? It's always true. Then I need to know something, not from Mercer, not from Ada, from you. She leaned forward, and her eyes held his with a ferocity that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with the irreducible stubbornness of a woman who had watched her husband die slowly and had not looked away. Can you protect my daughter? The question hit the center of Ammon's chest like a fist, not because it was unexpected. He'd been waiting for it since the moment Lottie had appeared out of the rainstorm, but because answering it honestly required acknowledging something he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding. The gap between what he was willing to do and what he was able to guarantee. He couldn't guarantee Lottie's safety. He couldn't guarantee anything. The world was built on the bones of promises that well-meaning people couldn't keep, and Ammon had stood at enough gravesides to know that the distance between commitment and outcome was measured in variables that no amount of planning could control. But Marla wasn't asking for a guarantee. She was asking for something harder. She was asking him to look her in the eyes and tell her he would stand between her daughter and whatever came next, regardless of what it cost him, regardless of whether the math worked, regardless of whether the outcome was victory or the kind of defeat that leaves marks on everyone who participated. Yes, Ammon said. One word, no qualification, no escape clause, just the sound of a man stepping off a ledge he couldn't step back onto. Mercer watched this exchange with the detached attention of a man who'd spent his career studying the moment when situations become irreversible. Then you need what I have, Mercer said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a USB drive. Small, black, unmarked. He placed it on the table between them. This contains copies of internal Ridgeline transaction records from my 11 months of employment, purchase orders, resale invoices, communication logs between Slade and Teague, and the skip trace files I processed, including the 7 cases where assets were stolen after legal acquisition failed. Ammon picked up the drive. It weighed almost nothing, the weight of a man's conscience compressed into 8 gigabytes of data. Why didn't you turn this over before? Because I was afraid. Because Teague's people made it clear that former employees who discussed company operations would face legal consequences I couldn't afford. And because... He paused. The flat gray eyes shifted, and for a moment something moved behind them. Something raw and old and shaped like shame. Because my daughter asked me to stop, and I stopped. I stopped everything. I stopped working. I stopped looking. I stopped caring about the families on those files. I told myself it wasn't my fight. He looked at Marla. Then Dutch told me about Lottie, about the rainstorm, about the air cleaner with the engraving. His voice cracked. Hairline, almost inaudible. The kind of fracture that men like Mercer spend their entire lives preventing. And I remembered that my daughter didn't ask me to stop caring. She asked me to stop hurting people. There's a difference. The bar was quiet. The television flickered. A car passed on Route 22, its tires hissing on wet asphalt. The sound faded, and the silence it left behind was the kind of silence that exists in rooms where decisions have been made that cannot be unmade. Ammon put the USB drive in his vest pocket. Ada gets this within the hour. She combines it with the public record she's already pulled, the evidence Felix is holding, and the documentation from Everett's garage. Together, it's enough to take to the state attorney general. Not the county level. They're compromised. State. Teague will fight it, Mercer said. Teague can fight whatever he wants, but he can't fight 300 families and a documented pattern of fraud, theft, and witness intimidation. Not at the state level. Not with this much evidence. And Slade? Slade is a field operative who just had his cover blown in a dead man's garage. Whatever his real name is, his usefulness to Ridgeline ended the moment we found that inventory sticker. They'll cut him loose. They don't cut people loose, Mercer said. They relocate them. New name, new territory, new victims. The machine doesn't stop because you remove one part. It replaces the part and keeps running. Then we don't remove the part. We shut down the machine. Ammon stood up. The chair scraped against the wooden floor with a sound that cut through the bar like a blade. Mercer, how long before Teague finds out you talked to us? He already knows. He has people in this town. People who notice when men on motorcycles meet in back booths with former employees. How long before he acts on it? Hours, maybe less. He'll file an injunction first, try to freeze any legal action through the courts. If that doesn't work, he'll escalate to the other mechanisms. The SUV kind. The SUV kind. Ammon looked at Dutch. Call Peg. Tell her to take Lottie to the backup location, the cabin on Lake Mitcham. No phones. No address on file. Nobody knows about it except chapter members. Done. Cutter. Ride to the gas station on County Road 4. Pick up Felix and the evidence case. Bring it directly to Ada's office. Do not stop. Do not deviate. If you see a vehicle following you, call me and keep riding. Understood. Marla, you're with me. We're going to Ada's office. You're going to sit in front of her computer and identify every piece of evidence we have. Then you're going to sign a formal complaint to the state attorney general. Your name, your story, your signature. Real this time. Marla stood up. She was shaking, not from fear, but from the full-body tremor that comes from sustained adrenaline operating in a system that hasn't slept or eaten properly in 36 hours. Despite the shaking, her eyes were clear. And after I sign it? After you sign it, we send it. And then we wait for Ridgeline to find out that a widow from Hadley Road just put her name on a document that connects their $4 million operation to a dead man's motorcycle, a stolen carburetor, and a forged signature. And that every family they've ever cheated is about to receive a phone call from a forensic accountant with a very long memory and a very short temper. They left the bar in formation, Ammon and Marla on the Road King, Dutch in the truck, Cutter peeling off toward County Road 4, his Dyna leaning into the curve with the controlled urgency of a man on a timed mission. The engines filled the afternoon air with a sound that was part thunder, part heartbeat, part declaration. The noise that men make when they've stopped calculating odds and started moving on commitment alone. Ammon's phone rang as they hit Route 22. Ada's number. He answered through the bike's Bluetooth, the speaker crackling in his helmet. Ammon, the seizure order has been modified. Teague just filed an amendment expanding the scope to include all personal property associated with the motorcycle, tools, documentation, maintenance records, and accessories. They're coming for the evidence. They're coming for the evidence. The amended order was signed by Finney 20 minutes ago. A second deputy is being dispatched to the Arlen property to execute the expanded seizure. The evidence isn't at the Arlen property. They don't know that. But when they arrive and find an empty garage, they'll know someone moved it, and they'll start looking. Let them look. By the time they find anything, the complaint will be filed. Ammon, listen to me. I just received a phone call. Unlisted number, male voice. He didn't identify himself. He said, and I'm quoting, "Ms. Kane, your involvement in the Arlen matter has been noted. We recommend you reconsider your participation." Then he hung up. Ammon's grip tightened on the handlebars. Behind him, Marla's arms tightened around his waist. She could hear the call through the helmet speaker, and her body had reacted before her brain caught up. "Are you safe?" "I'm in my office. The door is locked. My neighbor is a retired state trooper who owes me a favor, and he's currently sitting in my hallway with a thermos of coffee and a legal right to carry a firearm. I'm fine." "Ada, I said I'm fine. Don't waste time worrying about me. Worry about getting here with that complaint signed before Teague files an injunction that freezes the entire case." "How long before an injunction?" "He has to petition the circuit court. Even with a friendly judge, that takes a minimum of 4 hours from filing. The complaint to the AG goes through a different channel. Direct submission, no judicial review required. If you get here within 90 minutes and Marla signs, we can file before Teague even finishes drafting his motion." 90 minutes. 90 minutes, Ammon. That's your window. After that, every court in this county becomes a wall between you and the people who need to hear this story. He pushed the Road King harder. The engine responded with the deep, rolling thunder of a machine that had been built for exactly this. Not speed, but relentless, unstoppable forward motion. The highway opened up in front of them, wet and gleaming, the afternoon light turning the asphalt into a ribbon of dark silver that stretched toward a horizon where everything was about to change. Marla's arms tightened around him. Her chin was on his shoulder. Her voice came through the wind, barely audible, stripped of everything except the raw frequency of a woman who had made a decision and was riding into its consequences at 70 miles per hour. "Ammon." "Yeah." "Tell me we're going to make it." He didn't answer right away. The road blurred beneath them. The engine sang. The wind tore at his vest and beard, and the last remnants of the night that had started with a barefoot girl and a rusted piece of metal and a question that had opened a door he could never close. "We're going to make it," he said. And 63 miles behind them, on a county road outside Calvary Flats, a black SUV with no plates turned onto Hadley Road and parked in front of the empty Arlen garage. And the two men who stepped out of it didn't carry clipboards, didn't carry badges, and didn't knock before they tried the door. They made it to Ada's office in 71 minutes. The building was a converted farmhouse on the outskirts of Benton, Arkansas. White-clabbered, gone gray with age, a covered porch with 2 rocking chairs that hadn't rocked in years, and a hand-painted sign by the door that read, A. Kane, Research and Consulting. The kind of sign that tells you nothing about what happens inside, which was exactly the point. Ada met them at the door. She was 51 years old with short, steel-colored hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades sitting in front of screens and had compensated by standing aggressively straight the rest of the time. Her eyes were brown and sharp and tired in the way that people who fight systems for a living are always tired. Not sleepy, but worn, the way a blade gets worn by the things it cuts through. The retired state trooper, a thick, quiet man named Holt who smelled like coffee and gun oil, nodded at Ammon from his chair in the hallway and went back to reading a paperback with the studied indifference of someone who was paying attention to everything while appearing to notice nothing. "Inside," Ada said. "Now." Her office was small. 2 desks, 4 monitors, a printer that sounded like it was dying, and every horizontal surface covered in paper. Court filings, property records, printouts from county databases, spreadsheets covered in yellow highlighter and red ink. The walls were bare except for a single-framed photograph of a younger Ada shaking hands with a woman in a state government blazer. Beneath the photo, someone had written in ballpoint pen, "The last honest auditor in Arkansas, fired for accuracy." "Sit," Ada said to Marla, pulling out a chair. "You're signing 3 documents. The first is a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office alleging fraud, theft, forgery, and predatory business practices against Ridgeline Asset Recovery and its subsidiaries. The second is an affidavit detailing your interactions with Vernon Slade, including his unauthorized access to your garage, the forged signature on the county transfer, and his pattern of late-night visits. The third is a request for emergency preservation of evidence, the motorcycle currently in county custody. What does preservation mean? It means a legal order preventing anyone from modifying, disassembling, or transferring the motorcycle until the investigation is complete. It freezes the bike in place. Nobody touches it. Will it work? At the county level, with Finney on the bench? No, but the AG's office operates above county jurisdiction. If they accept the complaint, and with this evidence package they will, they can issue a state-level preservation order that supersedes anything Finney signs. Marla sat down. Ada placed the documents in front of her, 3 stacks of paper, each flagged with sticky tabs marking the signature lines. Next to them, a black pen. Marla picked up the pen. She held it for a moment, not hesitating but feeling its weight, the weight of a decision that couldn't be unsigned once the ink dried. My husband kept records for 20 years, she said. Every oil change, every gasket, every bolt. He wrote everything down because he believed that if you documented something, it existed in a way that couldn't be denied. She looked at Ammon. I'm documenting this. She signed all 3 documents in 4 minutes. Steady hand, full name, each signature placed precisely on the line, the way someone signs a document when they understand that their handwriting is becoming evidence. Ada collected the pages, scanned them into her system, and began the submission process. The complaint went to the State Attorney General's electronic filing portal. The affidavit went to a secure digital archive. The preservation request went by email and certified digital delivery to the AG's Civil Enforcement Division with a priority flag. Filed, Ada said at 4:22 p.m. All 3. Confirmation numbers received. The AG's office has a 48-hour initial review window, but I flagged this as involving ongoing destruction of evidence and active witness intimidation. That typically accelerates review to 12 hours. Ammon's phone rang. Dutch. Talk to me. Lottie's at the cabin. Peg's with her. Lake's quiet. No vehicles on the access road. She's safe. Good. But that's not why I'm calling. Felix just arrived at Ada's with the evidence case, and Mercer called me 10 minutes ago. He's been sitting in his car outside his apartment and watched 2 men try his front door. They didn't knock. They just tried the handle. When it didn't open, they walked back to a black SUV parked across the street and sat there. Same SUV, no plates, tinted windows, same profile. They're watching him. They're watching all of us. Ammon, this thing is accelerating. Once Ridgeline realizes the complaint has been filed, they're going to move from intimidation to damage control. And their version of damage control is burning everything that connects them to the evidence. The evidence is filed. It's in the state system. They can't burn what's already digital. They're not trying to burn the evidence, they're trying to burn the witnesses. Silence on the line. Ammon looked through the window at the road outside Ada's office. Empty. Late afternoon light turning the asphalt amber. A crow sitting on a fence post watching nothing. Get to Ada's. Bring Cutter. Bring Felix. Everyone in one location until the AG responds. On our way? By 6 o'clock, they were all in Ada's office. Ammon, Dutch, Cutter, Felix, Mercer, Marla, and Ada. 7 people in a room designed for 2, the air thick with coffee and tension, and the particular exhaustion that comes from being awake for more than 30 hours on a diet of adrenaline and grilled cheese sandwiches. Holt, the retired trooper, remained in the hallway, his chair now angled toward the front door, his paperback closed on his knee, his right hand resting near his hip, with the casual deliberateness of a man who hadn't forgotten how to be ready. The monitors glowed, the printer hummed. Outside, the sun was setting behind a bank of clouds that looked like bruises healing. Purple fading to yellow, yellow fading to the pale gray of dusk. Ada's phone rang at 6:17 p.m. She answered it, listened for 90 seconds without speaking. Then she said, "Understood, yes, she's here. I'll convey that. Thank you." She hung up and turned to the room. The State Attorney General's office has opened a formal investigation into Ridgeline Asset Recovery, Greystone Capital Partners, and all associated subsidiaries. The complaint has been accepted. The preservation order for the Arlen motorcycle has been issued, effective immediately, state jurisdiction, superseding all county-level orders. No one is permitted to access, modify, or transport the motorcycle without authorization from the AG's Enforcement Division. The room exhaled. Not celebration, release. The sound of 7 people simultaneously letting go of a breath they'd been holding for so long, they'd forgotten they were holding it. Additionally, Ada continued, based on the evidence submitted, including Mercer's internal records, the AG is requesting cooperation from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division regarding Ridgeline's interstate operations and potential wire fraud in connection with overseas resale transactions. Mercer leaned back in his chair. His face showed nothing, but his hands, which had been knotted together on the table, separated. Fingers spreading, palms opening, the involuntary gesture of a man releasing something he'd been carrying for years. FBI, he said. Interstate fraud and overseas wire transfers trigger federal jurisdiction. Your records provided the connection. Teague will fight it. Teague can file every motion in the legal dictionary. Federal investigation doesn't stop for injunctions. And the moment the FBI subpoenas Ridgeline's internal books, every transaction they've ever processed becomes discoverable. All 300 of them. Ammon looked at Marla. She was sitting very still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the monitor where the confirmation numbers were displayed. A column of digits that represented the moment a system designed to crush her had instead recorded her testimony and assigned it a tracking number. What happens to Slade? Marla asked. If his identity is fabricated, and it appears to be, federal investigation will uncover his real name and history. If he's connected to the stolen assets Mercer documented, he'll face charges in multiple jurisdictions. And the motorcycle? The preservation order keeps it in county custody, untouched, until the investigation concludes. Once the AG confirms the forged signature and invalidates the fraudulent transfer, the title reverts to Everett's estate, to you. How long? Weeks. Maybe a month. Legal machinery moves slowly, but the bike will come home, Marla. That part is certain. Marla nodded. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She sat in the chair in a converted farmhouse surrounded by people she hadn't known 24 hours ago and absorbed the information with the measured stillness of a woman who had learned that good news arrives in the same quiet voice as bad news, and the only way to tell the difference is to wait and see which one is still true in the morning. The calls came over the next 3 hours. At 7:40 p.m., the county sheriff's office contacted Ada to confirm receipt of the state preservation order and to notify that Deputy Haskell had secured the motorcycle in a locked evidence bay pending further instruction. Haskell had also filed a supplemental report documenting the condition of the vehicle at the time of seizure, photographs, serial numbers, component inventory, exactly as Amlin had requested. Buried in the report was a single handwritten note. Vehicle appeared to have been recently restored to original specifications. Condition inconsistent with the damaged state described in the Ridgeline purchase agreement. Deputy Haskell, it turned out, had been paying closer attention than anyone realized. At 8:15 p.m., Mercer received a text from an unknown number. 4 words. We know where you are. He showed it to Ada, who photographed it, logged it, and forwarded it to the AG's office as evidence of witness intimidation in an active federal referral. At 8:52 p.m., Dutch's sister Peg called from the cabin. Lottie had eaten dinner, taken a bath, and fallen asleep on the couch, with the beagle on her feet and the air cleaner cover on her chest. She'd asked one question before closing her eyes. Is my mom okay? Peg had said yes. And at 9:30 p.m., a patrol unit from the state police, dispatched by the AG's office under the investigation's witness protection provisions, arrived at Ada's office and parked in the driveway. 2 troopers. Marked vehicle. Visible presence. The black SUV that had been circling the area since sundown, spotted twice by Holt on the approach road, did not return after the patrol unit appeared. The machine was still running, but the gears had been jammed, and for the first time in 4 years, the people operating it were being watched by something bigger than the machine itself. By midnight, the office was quiet. Cutter was asleep in a chair with his chin on his chest, his grease-stained hands folded across his stomach, like a man who'd done his work and had earned the right to rest. Felix was on the floor with his back against the wall, eyes closed, his scarred face softened by sleep into something that almost looked peaceful. Mercer had left at 10, driven home under state police escort, his apartment now part of the investigation's protected perimeter. Dutch was on the porch, smoking. Ammon joined him. The night was clear. The storm that had started everything, the rain that had driven Lottie onto the highway, that had soaked Ammon's leather at May's diner, that had pounded the Arlen garage while 4 men rebuilt a dead man's motorcycle, was gone. The sky above Benton was filled with stars, thick and cold and indifferent in the way that stars are always indifferent, shining on the just and the unjust and the exhausted alike. "Hell of a day," Dutch said. "Hell of a night." Technically, it started as a night, then became a day. Now it's a night again. I've lost track. That happens when you stop sleeping. Dutch exhaled smoke. It rose into the starlight and disappeared. "You were right about Collinsville." Ammon didn't respond. "I said it was different. It wasn't different. It's never different. It's always the same. Somebody small gets stepped on by somebody big, and we either show up or we don't. The details change. The math doesn't. The math got complicated today." "The math is always complicated. That's why most people don't do it." Dutch flicked ash off his cigarette. "But Ammon, I need to say this, and I'm only going to say it once. What happened in that kitchen when Marla asked if you could protect her daughter? I remember. You said yes, without thinking, without calculating. You just said yes." Dutch paused. "You know why that scares me? Because I might not be able to. Because you meant it. And when you mean something like that, it doesn't end when the case ends. It doesn't end when the AG files charges, or when the bike comes home, or when Slade gets arrested. It ends when the kid is safe, really safe, and really safe, for a kid who lost her father and almost lost everything else. That's a long road, brother. That's a road that doesn't have an exit." Ammon smoked in silence for a moment. The stars moved overhead in their ancient, patient rotation. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice and stopped. "You remember what Everett wrote on that air cleaner? For Lottie, when the road gets quiet. The road got quiet for that kid 11 months ago. And it stayed quiet until last night. Nobody came. Not the neighbors, not the county, not the system that was supposed to catch men like Slade before they reached women like Marla. Nobody came until a little girl put on one sneaker and walked 3 miles through a rainstorm to find a stranger. She found you. She found the nearest motorcycle. I just happened to be next to it." Dutch smiled. It was a tired smile, the kind that lives in the corners of the mouth and doesn't fully commit to the face, but is genuine in the way that only exhaustion can produce. "Same thing." The door opened behind them. Marla stepped onto the porch. She'd washed her face again. Her hair was down. The first time Ammon had seen it down, dark brown, falling past her shoulders, making her look younger and also more exposed, as though letting her hair down was an act of trust she hadn't performed in months. "Ada says I can use her phone to call Lottie in the morning." "Good. She also says there's a spare room upstairs with a bed. She told me to sleep." "You should." Marla leaned against the porch railing. She looked at the stars with the expression of someone seeing them for the first time, or seeing them again after a long time spent looking at ceilings and paperwork and the insides of her own hands. "I keep thinking about the note," she said. "Everett's note. Please protect my girls." He didn't write it to anyone specific. He just wrote it, like a message in a bottle. He put it inside the motorcycle and hoped it would find the right person. "It found 4 of us," Dutch said. "Whether we're the right ones is debatable. You're the ones who showed up. That makes you the right ones." She was quiet for a moment. "My husband was a simple man. He worked at the grain elevator 6 days a week. He rode his motorcycle on Sunday mornings, 1 hour, same route, back before lunch. He didn't drink. He didn't fight. He didn't have opinions about politics or philosophy or the meaning of life. He had opinions about carburetor tuning and oil weight and whether Lottie's shoes were tied tight enough." Her voice was steady, measured. The voice of someone telling a story they've held inside so long that it comes out fully formed, like a fossil extracted from stone. When he got diagnosed, the first thing he did was go to the garage and change the oil. Not because the bike needed it, because it was the one thing in his life he could still fix. Ammon looked at her. The porch light was behind him, which meant his face was in shadow, which meant she couldn't see the thing that was happening in his eyes. The slow, tectonic shift of a man recognizing himself in someone else's description of a dead stranger. Changing the oil because it's the one thing you can still fix. That was him. That was his whole life. That was why he sat outside dying diners in the rain and rebuilt engines at 4 a.m. and said yes to questions he couldn't guarantee the answer to. Because fixing things, motorcycles, situations, the distance between a child and the safety she deserved, was the only language he spoke fluently. And when you only speak one language, you use it for everything, even the things it wasn't designed to say. Go to sleep, Marla. I will. But first, she reached into the pocket of the flannel shirt, Everett's shirt, still too big, still carrying whatever remained of him in its fibers, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to Ammon. He took it, unfolded it. It was a page from Everett's notebook. Not the maintenance log, but a different section in the back, one they hadn't found during the night. The handwriting was the same careful print, but looser, less technical, personal. If someone is reading my notebook, it means someone cared enough to look. Whoever you are, mechanic, writer, stranger, thank you for paying attention to the small things. The small things are the whole engine. Ammon read it twice. He folded it and put it in his vest pocket next to the USB drive and Vernon Slade's brochure and all the other pieces of paper that had accumulated over the last 30 hours like layers of sediment forming a new geography. Good night, Ammon. Good night, Marla. She went inside. The screen door closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Dutch finished his cigarette. He ground the butt under his boot and stood up. I'm going to sleep in the truck. My back can't take another chair. Take the bench seat. I'll take the cab floor. You're not sleeping. No. You should. I will. After. After what? Ammon didn't answer. He sat on the porch in the dark and listened to the night. The insects, the distant highway, the tick of cooling engines, the faint hum of Ada's monitors still running inside the house. The state trooper's patrol car sat in the driveway, its dashboard light glowing blue in the dark. One of the troopers was awake, watching the road. The other was asleep in the passenger seat, head back, hat over his eyes. The world was still dangerous. Ridgeline was still operational. Teague was still lawyered up. Somewhere, Vernon Slade, or whoever he really was sitting in a room calculating his next move. And somewhere else, in a cabin on Lake Mitcham, an 8-year-old girl was sleeping with a piece of rusted chrome against her chest, dreaming whatever dreams children dream when they've spent their entire short lives learning that the things they love can be taken from them by forces they can't see or fight or understand. But tonight, the evidence was filed. The complaint was logged. The preservation order was in effect. And 4 men who had no obligation to be here, who had driven through a rainstorm, rebuilt an engine, faced down a con artist, outmaneuvered a corporate fraud operation, and moved a child to safety, were sleeping in chairs and on floors and in the cab of a battered truck because this is what they did. Not because they were heroes, because they were broken in the exact right way, broken in the way that makes you recognize other broken things and reach for your tools instead of looking away. The motorcycle would come home. The investigation would grind forward. The families on Mercer's list, all 300 of them, would receive phone calls from people who wanted to hear their stories. And Vernon Slade's inventory of stolen parts, numbered and cataloged with the meticulous arrogance of a man who never expected to be caught, would become the evidence that dismantled the machine he served. That was tomorrow, and the day after, and the weeks and months after that. Tonight was for sitting on a porch and watching the stars. 3 weeks later, Ammon Rook pulled up to the Arlen house on Hadley Road at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. The sky was blue and scrubbed clean, the way Arkansas skies get in late autumn when the humidity breaks and the air turns thin and bright like water from a cold well. The mud in the yard had dried. The chain-link fence had been straightened. Someone had replaced the leaning posts with new ones, set in concrete, standing upright for the first time in years. He wasn't alone. Dutch pulled in behind him on the road glide. Cutter and Felix followed. Behind them, on a flatbed trailer pulled by a county vehicle, was the Heritage Softail, The state attorney general's office had released the motorcycle 2 days earlier, following the formal invalidation of Vernon Slade's fraudulent purchase agreement and the confirmation of Marla Arlen as sole custodial owner of the vehicle. The title transfer had been voided, the forged signature had been referred to the county prosecutor for criminal charges, and Judge Harold Finney had quietly recused himself from all matters involving Ridgeline asset recovery, citing unspecified conflicts of interest that the local newspaper was already asking questions about. Vernon Slade, whose real name turned out to be Dale Kirchner, a former used car broker from Missouri with 2 prior fraud convictions under different aliases, had been arrested at a motel in Texarkana 11 days after the complaint was filed. He was found with $14,000 in cash, 3 sets of identification, and a laptop containing detailed records of every component swap he'd ever performed, organized by victim name, asset type, and estimated profit margin. The laptop alone was enough to build cases against Ridgeline in 4 states. Cole Teague of Teague and Associates had been served with a federal subpoena. His office had been raided the same morning. The filing cabinets that Ada suspected contained the real transaction records, the ones that showed how much families had been cheated, how much Ridgeline had profited, and how the proceeds had been laundered through overseas auction sales, were now in federal custody. Teague had hired 3 attorneys. None of them were returning Ada's calls, and Leland Marsh, the man behind Greystone Capital Partners, the invisible architect of the entire operation, had been identified through Mercer's records as a former banking executive from Connecticut who had reinvented himself as a private equity operator specializing in distressed assets. The FBI was building a case. Marsh had not yet been charged, but the machine he'd built was no longer invisible, and the families it had chewed through were no longer silent. Ada Kane had contacted 67 of the 300 families on Ridgeline's transaction list. 43 of them had agreed to provide statements. 19 had filed independent complaints, and the total estimated value of assets acquired through fraudulent undervaluation, based on Ada's preliminary analysis, exceeded $11 million. All of that was paperwork, legal process, the slow grinding machinery of accountability that would take months or years to produce final outcomes. But today was Saturday, and the motorcycle was coming home. Marla came out of the house when she heard the engines. She was wearing jeans and a clean shirt, not Everett's flannel, her own clothes. Her hair was pulled back, but differently, deliberately. The way someone arranges themselves when they've started caring about how they appear. Not for vanity, but because caring about small things is a sign that the big things have stabilized enough to allow it. Lottie came out behind her. She was wearing both sneakers. The Heritage Softail came off the flatbed the way something sacred returns to the ground. Slowly, with many hands, with the particular care that men show when they understand that what they're carrying weighs more than its physical mass. Amin guided it down the ramp. Dutch steadied the rear. Cutter walked alongside with his hand on the engine guard, checking clearance, watching the tires, ensuring that the machine touched concrete gently because gentle was the only appropriate speed for a homecoming. They rolled it into the garage. The same concrete floor, the same pegboard with Everett's tools hanging in their marked positions, the same workbench, now empty of evidence bags and shop rags, and the debris of a night that had changed everything. The Harley sat in the center of the floor, blue paint glowing under the morning light coming through the open door, chrome catching the sun, the S&S carburetor, serial number 471-SS-97, sitting in its proper position, cleaned and tuned by Cutter's hands, breathing the way Everett had designed it to breathe. Lottie walked to the motorcycle. She placed both hands on the gas tank. She closed her eyes. Nobody spoke. Then Ammon reached into his vest and pulled out the key. Not the ignition key. A different key. The one to the padlock Marla had put on the garage door months ago to protect a motorcycle she thought was broken. He held it out to Marla. She didn't take it. "Start it," she said. Ammon looked at her. "I want to hear it. Lottie wants to hear it." Ammon put the key in the ignition. He didn't sit on the bike. He stood beside it, the way a man stands beside something that belongs to someone else, respectfully, at the edge, participating without claiming ownership. He turned the key. The dashboard lit up. The fuel pump hummed. The engine turned over once, twice, caught on the third revolution, and the Heritage Softail roared to life. The sound filled the garage like a living thing, deep, full-throated, the unmistakable voice of a Harley-Davidson V-twin running on original components maintained by a man who had loved it enough to document every heartbeat. The concrete vibrated. The tools on the pegboard rattled softly. The morning air in the garage moved in new directions, pushed by the exhaust, carrying the smell of gasoline and hot metal and the invisible residue of 20 years of devotion. Lottie pressed her ear against the gas tank. She stayed like that for a long time, eyes closed, hands flat on the metal, listening to the engine the way a child listens to a parent's chest. Not for the mechanical sound, but for the presence behind it, the proof that something endures. When she opened her eyes, they were wet, but she was smiling. "It sounds like Dad came back," she whispered. Nobody corrected her, because in the ways that mattered, in the vibration of the metal, in the sound of an engine that had been rescued from silence, in the message carved into chrome by a dying man's hand, she was right. Ammon killed the engine. The silence that followed was the good kind. Not empty, but full, packed with the echoes of what had just happened and the slower, quieter promise of what would come next. He reached into his vest one more time and produced a folded receipt. He handed it to Marla. She opened it. At the top, in Cutter's handwriting, it read, "Iron Knuckles MC, Roadside Assistance Division." Below that, an itemized list of services: carburetor restoration, ignition replacement, fuel system repair, electrical diagnostic, full engine inspection, evidence documentation, overnight labor. At the bottom, stamped in red ink, total $0. And beneath the total, in Ammon's handwriting, blocky, imperfect, the script of a man who said more with his hands than with his pen, paid in full by Everett's good maintenance. Marla held the receipt against her chest. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose and held the piece of paper the way Lottie held the air cleaner cover, like something that proved a debt had been paid by someone who was no longer here to collect it. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank us. Thank your husband. He built a machine that was worth saving and left a record that proved it. All we did was read what he wrote." The bikers walked out of the garage into the morning sunlight. The driveway was clean, the porch light was off, unnecessary now, with the sun up and the world bright, and the kind of silence that follows storms settling over Hadley Road like a blanket being pulled over a sleeping child. Ammon swung his leg over the Road King. Dutch mounted the Road Glide. Cutter kicked the Dyna to life. Felix sat on his Softail Slim and adjusted his gloves with the practiced calm of a man who was ready to ride, and would always be ready to ride because riding was the only piece he'd ever fully trusted. Marla and Lottie stood in the driveway. Lottie waved, a small wave, just her fingers, the kind of wave that children give when they want someone to know they're watching but don't want to make too much noise about it. Ammon raised 2 fingers off the handlebar. Not a wave. An acknowledgement. The kind that riders give each other on the highway. A gesture that says, "I see you, I know the road, ride safe." The 4 motorcycles pulled out of the driveway single file. They turned onto Hadley Road. The engines rumbled low and steady, not aggressive, not announcing, just moving. The sound of men returning to the road because the road was where they lived, and living was what they did between the moments when someone needed them to stop. The morning air was cold and clean. The highway opened up in front of them. Route 9, the same stretch of blacktop where Ammon had been sitting outside May's diner 30 hours ago, smoking a cigarette in the rain, watching darkness and thinking about nothing. May's neon sign was still half dead, still buzzing, still casting its dim flicker across the parking lot where a little girl had appeared out of a storm carrying the last heartbeat her father ever left behind. Ammon rode past the diner without stopping, but he looked at it, and the bench where he'd been sitting, and the spot on the gravel where Lottie had stood in one sneaker, holding a rusted piece of chrome wrapped in a dish towel, asking a stranger if he could make a dead man's bike breathe again. The road stretched out ahead of him, flat, wet, gleaming in the early light. Behind him, 3 engines followed in formation. Brothers. Not by blood. By damage. By the specific, irreparable fractures that turned ordinary men into the kind of people who show up at 4 in the morning with toolkits and coffee and the willingness to kneel on cold concrete for hours because a child asked them to. The road got quiet after that. But it was the good kind of quiet, the kind that means someone's watching over you, the kind a father leaves behind in the metal and oil and thunder of a machine he loved. Not because the machine mattered, but because the girl who would one day ride it mattered more than anything the road could ever take away. And somewhere behind them, in a garage on Hadley Road, a Heritage Softail sat in a shaft of morning light, engine cooling, chrome ticking softly in the silence, the engraved words on its air cleaner catching the sun one letter at a time. For Lottie, when the road gets quiet. The road was quiet now, and Lottie was safe.